Welcome to Paranormal M, everyone. Tonight I have some more paranormal stories for you, whether you're listening in the dark or just trying to relax. If you like the stories in this video, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more. We're starting with a story from someone who had one intense experience after using cannabis, where memories seem to appear around them, followed by a voice they still can't explain. So get comfortable, let the night slow down a little, and I hope you all sleep well tonight. I want to tell you about something that happened to me when I was younger, because even now, years later, I still don't really know what to make of it. There were chapters of my life when I used cannabis from time to time. I had always heard that different cultures all over the world had used it in spiritual rituals or as a way to reach some kind of awakening. I knew that in my head, but I never truly understood it. Not until one particular afternoon. I was in my early 20s then, maybe 24 or 25. I hadn't smoked in a couple of years, but for whatever reason, I decided to try it again. Nothing dramatic, nothing reckless, just a small amount. At the time, I had this little workshop behind my house. It was quiet, a bit dusty, full of old tools and things I kept meaning to fix. I went out there alone, sat down, and smoked by myself. At first, everything felt normal. Then the air started to change. It was subtle in the beginning, almost like the light had softened. Then this golden shimmer spread across everything, like the whole room had been covered in a thin layer of liquid sunlight. It looked almost unreal, but not frightening. More like the world had slipped on a secret skin. And then I started seeing memories. Not just thinking about them, seeing them. People I had known, friends who had spent time with me in that workshop, moments I hadn't thought about in years, they began appearing around me. They were laughing, talking, moving silently, like scenes from an old home movie. One moment would dissolve, and another would take its place. Everything had that same warm, golden glow around it. I remember sitting there, watching these pieces of my life play out all around me, and for a little while I was just stunned. It felt beautiful, but it also started to become too much. So I told myself, okay, I need to go inside. I'll take a shower, calm down, and let this pass. But when I stood up, the people from those memories stood up too. That is the part that still makes my stomach tighten when I think about it. They didn't stay behind like images fading on a wall. They rose with me, turned with me, and followed me as I walked out of the workshop and toward the house. In that moment, they didn't feel like memories anymore. They felt present. A quiet little crowd from my own past, walking beside me. I went straight to the bathroom. I didn't want to look too closely at anything. I just wanted water, light, something ordinary. I stepped into the tub, turned on the shower, and the second the water touched my skin, the whole room vanished. There were no walls, no ceiling, no mirror, no house. Just white light. It was everywhere, bright, endless, and alive, like I had stepped into the heart of a star. I remember looking around, trying to understand where I was, and then I heard a voice. It was enormous, not loud in the usual way, but vast. It filled everything. It didn't sound human exactly, but it didn't feel cruel either. Somehow it felt familiar, serious, ancient, and strangely comforting. And it said, "I am the rider of the white horse, and when the hour arrives, you are to be my vessel." The last word echoed, and then it was over. Just like that, I was standing in my shower again. The water was running over me. The bathroom looked completely normal. The light was ordinary. The air was still. There was no golden shimmer, no people, no white void, no voice. Everything had snapped back into place in a single breath. That might be the strangest part of all for me. If this had only been the cannabis affecting my mind, I would have expected it to come on gradually and fade gradually. But it didn't. It ended like someone had switched off a lamp. I had never hallucinated before that day, and I haven't hallucinated since. I know what some people will hear in this: the rider of the white horse, the connection to the book of Revelation. I'm aware of it, but that only makes it more confusing for me, because I have never considered myself religious. I wasn't raised to obsess over biblical prophecy, and I definitely wasn't sitting there thinking about Revelation in a backyard workshop. So I still wonder about it. Why would my mind create something so specific from a belief system I didn't really follow? Was it just a strange chemical storm in my brain? Was it some buried symbol I had absorbed without realizing it? Or was something actually there with me that day? I don't have an answer. I only know what I experienced, and whatever it was, it has never really left me. I never really believed in the paranormal. I mean, I've heard stories. I've listened to people talk about things they couldn't explain, but I always thought there had to be some normal reason behind it. A sound outside, a half-asleep mind, bad timing. But now, after what's happened twice, exactly 1 year apart, on the same date, I'm honestly starting to wonder. I moved into this little bungalow about 2 years ago. Nothing about it seemed strange at first. It was quiet, a bit tucked away. The kind of place where you notice every creak and every gust of wind because there isn't much else going on. The first time it happened was April 12th, 2025. I had fallen asleep in my room with the back door open. I know, not the smartest thing, but it was one of those mild nights, and I didn't think much of it. At some point, I suddenly woke up. Not because of a noise, at least not at first. I just woke up with this horrible, tight feeling in my chest, like my body knew something was wrong before my brain did. I sat up, trying to get my bearings. Then I heard it. A scream. Not a fox scream. Not a person messing around. This was a proper, blood-freezing scream, and it sounded close enough that every part of me went still. I grabbed something to protect myself and just sat there, listening. Then it happened again. Closer. After that, silence. I waited, barely breathing, and then I heard it a third time. This time, it sounded like it came from my garden. I jumped up, slammed the back door shut, locked it, and just stood there with my heart going mad in my chest. Then the scream came again, but farther away this time. I remember thinking, what on earth was that? And then, as if that wasn't enough, every fire alarm in the house suddenly went off at once. There was no smoke, no fire, nothing burning, nothing that could have set them off. They'd never done anything like that before, and they haven't randomly done it since, except for what happened the next year. I turned them off, checked the whole place, and found nothing. That was it for that night. And honestly, after a while, I pushed it out of my mind. Then April 12th, 2026 happened. This was very recent, and the strange part is, I had completely forgotten about the year before, until after everything happened again. That night, I was in my room, but I wasn't asleep. There had been a few burglaries nearby, so I'd been extra careful. I checked all the doors. I made sure the windows were closed. I locked everything. There was no way anyone should have been able to get inside. For a bit of context, there's a stray cat I feed. I call her Millie. She started staying in the house most nights, but I'm certain she wasn't inside at that point. I would have noticed her. Then, out of nowhere, I heard my front door open. I know what my front door sounds like. I know the lock. I know the little shift of the handle and the way it creaks. So I grabbed something again and went to check. And there, sitting in the front room, was Millie. Just sitting there. The front door was closed. and when I checked it, it was locked. I can't explain that. I know I locked it earlier. I know she wasn't in the house, but somehow she was inside. The worst part was the way she looked. She was terrified, completely frozen, staring out the window like something was standing outside. She would not look away. I tried calling her, but she just kept staring. Then the fire alarm went off again, just like the year before. No smoke, no fire, nothing. I turned it off, checked the house, checked the doors again, and everything was locked. And that was the second encounter. I don't know what to make of it. I still don't want to jump straight to ghosts or anything like that. But two strange things happening on the exact same date, 1 year apart, in the same house, with the fire alarms going off both times? That feels harder to ignore. So if anyone knows more about this kind of thing, hauntings, spirits, dates repeating, whatever it might be, I genuinely appreciate hearing your thoughts. Because right now, I'm left wondering what on earth happens here every April 12th. I was only 3 years old the first time it happened. It was a bright, moon-washed night in the middle of summer, and I remember seeing my uncle standing near the upstairs balcony, talking to me as if everything was normal. It felt real. Not dreamlike, not blurry. Real. The next morning, I told my mother about it. That was when we found out he had passed away around that same time the night before. I was too little to understand what that meant back then, but somehow, that memory stayed with me. It never faded the way childhood memories usually do. As I got older, something else started happening. I began having a very specific kind of nightmare. The strange thing is, it is not always clear or visual. Sometimes I do not see a face. Sometimes I wake up and the details disappear almost instantly. But the feeling is always there. It feels like death. Not just fear, not just sadness. It is this heavy, bitter, awful feeling, like someone close to me has died, and when I wake up, I feel completely shaken. Even when nothing happens afterward, the fear stays in my body for days, sometimes even weeks. There have been false alarms, I know that. But between the time I was about 11 and my late 20s, there were several times when I had that exact kind of dream, and then, within a few days, I heard that someone had died. When I was a teenager, I had the dream once, and the very next day one of our neighbors passed away. I tried to push it out of my mind after that. I told myself it was nothing, just a coincidence, just a bad dream. Then, when I was 16, it happened again. I had the same kind of dream, and for the next few days, I was tense and alert, waiting for bad news. But nothing happened. So I started to relax. About 2 months later, I had the dream again. I know it was the same one because I wrote it down in my diary at the time. My grandfather died within 2 days. That one broke something in me. Logically, I know I did not cause it. I know that. But emotionally, I felt responsible somehow, like I had been warned and had done nothing. I stopped eating properly. I stopped going out. I barely spoke to anyone. I was just stuck in shock. There were other incidents over the years, but later in life, something happened that disturbed me even more. I have some aunts on one side of the family whom I mostly knew when I was younger. After that, I spent a lot of time away in hostels, and we lived far from them, so contact became limited to the occasional phone call. At some point, I realized I could not even clearly remember all their faces anymore. Then one night, I had that nightmare again. This time, I clearly remembered that it involved a woman dying. I woke up in extreme distress beside my boyfriend, and he could see how shaken I was. I told him, "It feels like someone has died." He held me and tried to comfort me. He said it was probably just a nightmare. 2 days later, we got the news that one of my aunts had died. I completely fell apart. My sleep became disturbed again. My mother was crying. All the guilt came rushing back, that horrible feeling that somehow I had known before it happened. I was so upset that I could not even bring myself to call their family and offer comfort. Then, within a month, I had the same dream again. This time, I remembered the woman's face clearly. It looked exactly like the aunt who had died the month before. So I told myself it must be grief. It had to be anxiety. Maybe my mind was replaying her image because she had already passed. But then another aunt suddenly had a stroke and was hospitalized because of a brain aneurysm. She went into a coma. While I was talking to my mother and trying to comfort her, I found out something I had not fully understood before. This aunt was the twin sister of the aunt who had died the month before from cardiac arrest. That detail made everything feel unreal, like the floor had tilted beneath me. Even recently, I had another nightmare where I was in a hospital and there were too many relatives gathered there. The next morning, I woke up to the news that my boyfriend's father had suffered a heart attack. Thankfully, he is okay now, but the fear came back immediately. What makes this so hard is that I am not someone who naturally reaches for supernatural explanations. I have a science degree. I work in a scientific field. My mind always tries to find patterns, causes, explanations, something rational to hold on to. But with this, I honestly do not know what to do anymore. Sometimes I feel like I am losing my grip. I have never felt comfortable telling people about this because I know how it sounds. Some people would laugh. Some would dismiss it. Some would say I am connecting unrelated events because I am scared. And maybe I am. I really do not know. But this has happened enough times, over enough years, that it has left me deeply frightened. The worst part is, I do not want this. I do not want to know beforehand if someone is going to die. I do not want to know if something bad is coming. I do not want to wake up with that feeling in my chest. I do not want to spend days terrified every time one of these dreams happens. I just want it to stop. So I am asking honestly, has anyone else ever had dreams, visions, or a strong sense of death before finding out that someone really had died? Especially more than once over many years. And if you have, how did you make sense of it? I want to tell you about something that happened when I was in college, because even now, when I think about it, I get this cold, crawling feeling. My boyfriend at the time, Carter, had a grandfather who died by suicide. Before he passed, he left a note addressed to his children. In it, he said that his wife, Carter's grandmother, was the reason he had done it. He also wrote that his kids could do whatever they wanted with the house, as long as she had nothing to do with it. He made it very clear that he did not want her living there. After that, the grandmother moved out pretty quickly, and eventually Carter's family moved into the house. Carter and I were both students then, so during summer and winter breaks, we would stay there with his parents. For a long time, nothing strange happened. The house felt normal. Heavy, maybe, because of what had happened there, but not haunted or anything like that. Then one summer, Carter's grandmother had to stay at the house for a couple of weeks. That was when everything changed. Every morning she would come downstairs exhausted and say she hadn't slept because someone had been standing in her doorway. Other nights, she said the lights kept turning on by themselves and staying on until she got up to turn them off. I'm ashamed to admit this now, but at first, I didn't really believe her. Carter and I thought maybe she was being dramatic, or maybe guilt was messing with her head. We even laughed about it a little, in that uncomfortable way people do when they don't know what else to say. And then one night, it happened to me. Carter and I were sleeping in a little guest cabin behind the house, maybe 30 feet away. It didn't have a bathroom, so if we needed to go, we had to walk back into the main house. Sometime around 1:30 in the morning, I woke up and went inside to use the bathroom. The moment I stepped in, I froze. Every light downstairs was on. Not one lamp, not a hallway light. All of them. The kitchen, the living room, the entryway, the little side room near the stairs. Everything was glowing like somebody had flipped the whole house awake. The only person sleeping downstairs was Carter's grandmother, and as far as I knew, she was asleep. I tried to tell myself there had to be a normal explanation. Maybe Carter had gone in earlier and left them on by accident. So while I was in the bathroom, I texted him, "Did you leave all the lights on downstairs?" Then I came out, and every single light was off. I can't properly describe what that felt like. It was as if the house had blinked. 1 second, it was lit from end to end, and the next, it was pitch black and waiting. I hadn't heard footsteps. I hadn't heard switches clicking. I hadn't heard a door, a floorboard, anything. And in that house, you would hear someone moving around at night. You absolutely would. I ran. I don't think I have ever moved that fast in my life. I flew out of that house and back to the cabin, shaking so badly I could barely get the words out. I asked Carter 2 things. First, "Did you leave all the lights on downstairs?" He said no. Then I asked, "Did you go in and turn them off?" He said no again. That was the moment my stomach just dropped. The next morning, I asked his grandmother if she had turned the lights on around 1:30. She said no. I asked if she had turned them off. Again, no. Carter's mom and stepdad said they had been asleep the entire time. After that, I couldn't laugh at the grandmother's stories anymore. While she stayed there, things kept happening, mostly at night. She said she saw a man standing in her doorway more than once. She said lights would turn on and stay on until she got out of bed to shut them off herself. And honestly, I believe her now. Carter's mom and I eventually started calling them his grandfather's little jokes, even though there was nothing funny about standing in that dark hallway after all the lights had gone out. His grandmother didn't even stay the full amount of time. She left early because she couldn't handle it anymore. I'm not saying I know for sure what happened. Part of me would still love a logical explanation, especially for how all those lights could turn on and then turn off again when they were in different rooms throughout the house. But whenever I start doubting whether anything exists after death, I think about that house. I think about Carter's grandfather. I think about those lights. And I remember exactly how it felt to run through the dark, knowing I had just walked into something I was never supposed to understand. I'm 19 now, but this happened when I was a kid, maybe around 8 or 9. Back then, I had a really short temper. I mean, I could get angry so fast, and for years I never understood why. Looking back now, part of me honestly wonders if it had something to do with the room I slept in, because after I moved out of that room, I rarely felt that kind of rage again. One day, I got into a really bad argument with my parents. I don't even remember what it was about anymore, but I remember running into my room, throwing myself onto my bed, and just sobbing. I was angry and hurt and overwhelmed, and I remember saying something like, "I wish I wasn't here right now." Then this strange thought came into my head. I don't know where it came from, but I said out loud that I'd give away part of my soul, only if I could still have control whenever I wanted it. I know that sounds ridiculous now. I was a child, and I'd already seen too much weird stuff online. But the moment I said it, everything inside me went quiet. The anger disappeared. The crying stopped. It was like someone had turned the volume down on the whole room. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling this strange, heavy calm. Then something made me look toward my closet. The door was open, and inside I saw two deep red eyes staring right at me. The second I saw them, my vision started going dark around the edges, slowly closing in from the sides. My whole body filled with this awful feeling, like dread had stepped into the room and was standing over me. My heart was pounding so loudly that I could hear it in my ears, but I couldn't move. Then, out of nowhere, this crushing tiredness hit me. I hadn't been tired before, not at all. But suddenly, it felt like my body was shutting down. I lay back, and it was like I was slipping away. I don't remember everything clearly after that, but I do remember fighting for whatever little control I still felt I had. I started saying the Our Father prayer as fast as I could. And as soon as I began reciting it, I felt something lift. Not all at once, slowly, like a weight was being pulled off my chest. So I kept saying it, over and over again, until that dark, heavy feeling faded, and I finally fell asleep. When I woke up, the room felt different. Not exactly bad, just strange, unreal. Like waking up from a long nap in the middle of the day, when the light feels wrong and everything around you seems a little disconnected. Not long after that, my older brother Mason moved out of his room, and I took it almost immediately. My old room stayed empty for a while until my grandmother moved in. As far as I know, she never experienced anything in there, but she's very religious in her own way. She keeps crosses around the room, has a picture of Jesus, and always has a Virgin Mary candle on her desk. So maybe that made a difference. I don't know. I've never experienced anything like that again, but I do still feel like I'm sensitive to certain things. And I do believe there's something in our house. It isn't like what I saw that night, though. This one is more like a shadow figure. Everyone in the house has seen it at some point, but none of us really talk about it much. Things get knocked over sometimes, or we hear little noises when nobody's there, but it doesn't bother us or the animals, so we just leave it alone. I also remember something else now. When I was younger and had friends sleep over in that room, more than one of them told me they saw something standing in the corner. At the time, I thought they were just trying to scare me, so I ignored it. But that was before the night with the red eyes. So now when I think back on it, I'm not so sure they were joking. I don't usually talk about this, honestly. I try not to go back there in my mind. I'm a little superstitious, and I do believe in spiritual things, even though I don't really go to church. But every time I tell this story, my body reacts before I can stop it. I get goosebumps. My throat tightens. My eyes start watering. Even now, just thinking about it, I feel that old fear creeping up again. This happened when I was about 10 years old. I'm 32 now, and it still stays with me. My family had just bought a new house in North Las Vegas. It was in a new neighborhood, so new that there were barely any houses around us yet. There was a gas station down the road. My school was maybe 10 minutes away, and everything else was just open desert and dirt. At first, the house looked perfect. Big, clean, bright. The kind of place where a family should feel safe. But from the very beginning, something felt wrong. My parents had also just bought a brand new silver sedan from the dealership. I remember the first day we went to check the house. We walked through it, made sure everything looked fine, and when it was time to leave, the car would not start. A new car, fresh from the lot. My dad took it back to the dealership, and of course, they couldn't find anything wrong with it. At the time, nobody thought much of it. But looking back, I feel like that was the first warning. Once we moved in, things started slowly. I would feel watched. Not in the way where you think someone might be standing nearby. This was heavier than that. It felt hateful, like something was behind me, staring with anger. And I know people say ghost, but that never felt right to me. It didn't feel like a ghost. It felt darker. One day, we came home from the store and every window in the house was open. Every single one. Nothing was missing. Nothing looked broken. Just all the windows wide open, like someone had walked through and done it on purpose. My mom changed in that house too. She was always gentle and loving, but while we lived there, she became quiet and distant. She would lock herself in her bedroom for hours. She just wasn't herself. My parents worked late a lot, so sometimes I was home alone, or I would stay with a neighbor friend until they came back. One evening, I was by myself in the back living room, the one connected to the kitchen and near the backyard. I was watching TV, trying to relax. Then I heard the upstairs toilet flush. I froze. I knew nobody else was home. I grabbed a blanket and hid underneath it on the couch. Then I heard the bathroom cabinet shut. It had one of those doors that slammed loudly if you let it go, and that sound came from upstairs clear as anything. I stayed under the blanket until I guess I fell asleep. The next thing I remember is my parents waking me up. And the strange thing is, we still had happy moments there. We had pool parties. Friends came over. The neighborhood kids would play outside. From the outside, it probably looked like a wonderful childhood house. But deep down, I hated being there. The fear got worse after my grandfather passed away. After his funeral, my dad brought home the cross that had been resting on his coffin. He wanted it as a keepsake, something to remember him by. But after that, the house felt even heavier. One day, my dad tried to bless the house with holy water. We had a cat named Brandy. She was my best friend. I loved her so much. While my dad was sprinkling holy water near the front door, Brandy suddenly turned toward the wall and started hissing. There was nothing there. She just stood there, staring at the wall, hissing for minutes. I looked at my dad, and the hair on his arms was standing straight up. Mine was too. Then there was the thing I saw in the window. I was outside playing with my friends near sunset. We lived at the end of a cul-de-sac, and above the garage was my parents' bedroom. It had one window facing the street. I looked up at that window and saw a black figure standing there. It had white hair. I looked away, then looked back almost immediately, and it was gone. But the curtains were moving lightly, like a small breeze had passed through them. Nobody was supposed to be in that room. I told my grandmother about it later. She was very religious, and she told me that sometimes evil shows itself that way. I don't know what to think about that now. Sometimes I wonder if something was wrong with the land itself. Maybe something happened there before the houses were built. I don't know. The last thing I'll mention is when I got sick. I was a skinny but healthy kid, and suddenly I became extremely ill. I looked pale and weak, almost like I was wasting away. My parents took me to doctors, but they couldn't figure out what was wrong. When I came home, Brandy would not leave my side. She followed me everywhere, even to the bathroom. She stayed close like she was protecting me. Eventually, I got better, but my family didn't. My parents became unhappy with each other. The house felt like it had drained all the warmth out of us. We sold it, and after that, my parents went their separate ways. Years later, I talked to my mom about it. She told me she felt the same darkness in that house. She said she would never go back either. Even after we moved, I had nightmares about being there again. I would dream I was trapped inside that house, walking through those rooms, feeling that same awful presence behind me. And even now, all these years later, when I talk about it, my eyes still water. My body still remembers. Late one night, close to midnight, My friend Micah and I were driving through this heavily wooded mountain area. We weren't going anywhere specific. We were just wandering, looking for unfamiliar back roads, the kind that feel a little hidden from the rest of the world. Eventually, we found one that looked perfect. Thick trees pressing in on both sides, no painted center line, no houses nearby, just this narrow road climbing up into the dark. We'd been on it for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and I remember clearly that we were going uphill because Micah kept shifting gears to keep the car from struggling. Then, out of nowhere, I started to feel strange. Not scared exactly, not at first, just uneasy, like the air inside the car had changed. I told Micah, and we both laughed because it sounded ridiculous. We made some joke about the road being cursed or haunted, just trying to shake it off. Then our headlights caught a bright yellow sign. It said, 1,000 feet, road ends. That made the feeling worse. I told him, a little more seriously this time, that something didn't feel right. He admitted he felt it too, but again, we tried to joke about it. Something like, well, whatever lives at the end of the road better not charge admission. Then we passed another sign. 500 feet, road ends. By then, I wasn't laughing anymore. I told Micah, as soon as we reach the end, turn around. Immediately. And when we got there, everything in me wanted to leave. The road ended in gravel. There were wooden barriers across the end, and a sign that simply said, End of road. Beyond that were trees. Off to one side, there was this little cluster of buildings. Micah turned the car around, and because I was in the passenger seat, I ended up facing the trees while the headlights swept across them. I don't know how to explain this in a way that sounds normal, because it didn't look normal. The ground beyond the road was completely flat, not gently sloped, not bumpy, not natural mountain terrain, just flat. There was no brush, no grass, no fallen branches around the trunks. Nothing. The trees themselves were thin, pale, and all spaced apart at the exact same distance, like someone had measured them with a ruler. When the headlights moved through them, it looked wrong. That's the only word I have. Wrong. My stomach dropped. My whole body felt heavy, like my bones had filled with wet cement. I told Micah to go. I didn't care how, I just wanted out. At the same time, he had seen the buildings on the other side. Later, he told me they gave him the same sick feeling. He said they looked like they weren't supposed to be there. There was one larger, red wooden building in front and two smaller ones behind it, almost like a little compound. There were no parking signs everywhere, way more than made sense. He said when the headlights hit the buildings, they looked just as wrong as the trees did to me. He didn't need convincing. He sped up the turn, and we drove out of there fast. After a while, once we had both calmed down, we decided not to go home yet. I know that sounds foolish, but we told ourselves we'd just gotten creeped out by a weird, dead-end road in the mountains. So we went a different direction, put on music, and tried to reset the mood. Eventually, we ended up on another road neither of us recognized. This one was sloping downward. After a few minutes, that feeling came back. I told Micah, I feel like we're on that same road again. He immediately said that wasn't possible. And honestly, he had reasons. This road was going downhill, not uphill. There were warning signs for curves and a 20 miles per hour speed limit. We passed a small parking area with a blue pickup truck in it, and none of that had been on the first road. So I tried to believe him. Then we went around a bend, and the headlights hit another yellow sign. 1,000 feet, road ends. We both panicked. This time, Micah didn't keep going. He turned around before we even got close to the next sign, though we could already see the 500 feet sign shining farther down the road. But as we drove back, we realized we were still going downhill. That made no sense. We had already been driving downhill before we turned around. We should have been going back up. Then we started recognizing things from the first road. A single orange streetlight. A particular house with a number Micah remembered because he'd pointed it out earlier. But the curve warning signs were gone. The blue truck was gone. The road had changed again, or we had, or something had folded over itself in a way roads are not supposed to do. We stopped talking much after that. We just drove home. Neither of us is especially superstitious. We're not the kind of people who jump to ghosts or portals or anything like that. But we both felt the same awful wrongness on that road before we'd even really discussed it. We both saw different parts of it and had the same reaction. I still don't know what happened that night. Maybe there's some ordinary explanation. Maybe there isn't. All I know is that road felt like it didn't want us there, and the second time we saw that sign, it felt like it had found us again. I grew up in a small rural town in Mexico, in a little house where it was just my mom, my older sister Mariela, our dog Osito, and me. My dad was living in the United States at the time, working as hard as he could so he could send money back home and help us get by. He missed so much while he was away, but when my sister turned 15, he made sure she had a celebration no one in our town would forget. There was music, food, a huge cake, and what felt like the whole town gathered around us. It was one of those parties where even the air feels excited. And, of course, because it was her quinceañera, my sister received her last doll. In our tradition, that doll represents a girl leaving childhood behind and stepping into womanhood. My sister was so happy when she got it. I still remember exactly what it looked like. It was porcelain, with pale blonde curls, a soft peach dress, and a little matching straw hat. It was honestly beautiful. My sister and I shared a bedroom back then, and after the party was over, she brought the doll into our room and placed it beside her like it was something precious. I wanted so badly to touch it, but she wouldn't let me. Not even once. The next morning, she made her bed the way she always did, arranging her stuffed animals and dolls carefully. Then she placed the porcelain doll right in the center, like it was the queen of the whole room. For a few weeks, nothing strange happened. Every morning, my sister followed the same little routine. She made her bed, lined up her toys, and placed the doll in the middle. I watched from a distance, still wanting to touch it. Then one day, when my sister was out of the house, I decided I was finally going to do it. I walked over to the bed and touched the doll's face. Her porcelain skin was cold and smooth. I ran my fingers through her blonde curls and even adjusted her tiny hat. And then, the room got quiet. Not normal quiet, heavy quiet. I remember staring into her eyes, and I don't really know why. There was something empty about them, something that made my stomach tighten. I suddenly felt like I had done something I wasn't supposed to do. So I put her back exactly where she had been and left the room. That night, I went to bed like always. I said goodnight to my sister, and she had already moved all her toys down beside the bed, the way she usually did. Sometime while I was sleeping, I started dreaming about the doll. In the dream, she was looking straight at me. Her eyes were hollow, not angry, not sad, just empty. And somehow that was worse. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't move. I kept trying to wake myself up, trying so hard, but I couldn't. When I finally opened my eyes, I still couldn't move. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My whole body was frozen. I could see the room around me, but I couldn't lift a finger. I don't know how long it lasted. It felt like forever. Then, suddenly, I could move again. And when I did, I looked down and saw the doll on the floor. She was facing me, just sitting there, staring. I ran out of that room so fast and went straight to my mom's bed. I stayed there the rest of the night. The next morning, I was terrified to go back into our room, but I did. When I walked in, my sister was arranging her toys again. Only this time, she didn't put the doll in the center of the bed. She picked it up, turned it around, and placed it somewhere else in the room. We didn't say anything to each other, but I knew. I knew she was scared too. For months after that, I hated being alone in that bedroom. The doll would show up in different spots around the room, and my sister always thought I was the one moving it. I would cry and tell her I only touched her that one time, but I was still the one who got blamed. Once, I was outside on the swing, and I swear I saw the doll watching me from near the house. I jumped off and ran back inside, only to find her sitting perfectly on my sister's bed. After a while, we stopped talking about it. We never told my mom. Years passed, and somehow we just learned to live with it. I refused to touch the doll again. I tried not to even look at her. Eventually, my family moved to the United States, and we left that doll behind in the old house. When my sister and I became adults, we finally talked about it. She told me she had dreamed about the doll too. She remembered the same thing I did, those empty eyes. She also admitted that the doll would end up in places where she knew she hadn't put it. At first, she really did think it was me, but now, looking back, she says she always knew something else was moving that doll. When we visit that old house now and stay in that room, we don't touch her. We turn her around and we leave her where she is, because that room feels like it belongs to her now. That is her space. I'm a grown adult now, and I still don't really know what I believe when it comes to the paranormal. I wouldn't say I'm someone who has all the answers. Honestly, I don't even know what to think about some of the things that have happened to me. But I've had more than a few strange experiences throughout my life, and this was the first one I can remember. My earliest memories start when I was about 4 years old, and I think the reason they begin there is because that was the first time I ever saw someone who had passed away. I grew up in a small rural village in Mexico. It was the kind of place where maybe a few hundred people lived, and everyone knew everyone. Most days, I played in my great-grandparents' yard because I loved being around my great-grandfather, Don Rafael. To me, he was just Grandpa Rafa. He would spread an old blanket under this big shade tree, and I would sit with him there for hours. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes he just watched me play. I remember feeling safe with him. One day, my mother took my hand and walked me to my great-grandparents' house. We went into a bedroom, and there were candles everywhere. The room was quiet, but full of people whispering and watching. My great-grandfather was lying on the bed. I sat beside him and looked at him. I remember not being scared. I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't understand why everyone was so serious, or why they were looking at me the way they were. After that, life seemed to keep going, at least for me. I still went outside to the tree. I still talked to Grandpa Rafa there. One afternoon, I came running into the kitchen, so excited I could barely hold still. My mom was washing dishes, and I opened my hands in front of her. I told her, "Look, Grandpa gave me candy." There was candy in my palms, a lot of it. Bright little wrapped pieces, the kind children treasure like tiny jewels. My mother took one from my hand and smiled, but later she told me that smile was only for me. Inside, she felt something turn cold. The next day, I was heading outside again, and she asked me where I was going. I told her, "Grandpa is waiting for me under the tree." At first, my mother thought maybe he had come to say goodbye. She knew how close we were. She thought maybe, somehow, he was giving me comfort, or maybe I was giving him peace. But it didn't stop. For weeks, I kept going to that tree. I would lie there in the shade and talk as if someone was sitting right beside me. My mom tried to explain that he had died, but I would point and say, "No, he's there, look." That's when she started to worry. She said she began speaking out loud to him, telling him that if it was really him, he needed to move on and let me be. But nothing changed. Then she started to wonder if maybe it wasn't him at all. Eventually, she called a priest. He came to the house, blessed me, blessed the tree, and blessed the rooms. I don't know if that's what made it stop, but soon after, I stopped talking about Grandpa Rafa, and I wasn't allowed to go near that tree anymore. Years passed. When I was about 12, I went to the local market to buy sweets. As I got close, I saw an old man standing in line, leaning on a cane. He looked straight at me. I smiled at him. Then someone called my name, and I turned to see who it was. It was one of my friends. When I looked back, the old man was gone. Later that same day, I went to my great-grandmother's house, and there, in the corner, I saw the cane. The same cane. I touched it, and I just knew. I don't know how to explain that feeling, but I knew it belonged to the old man I had seen at the market. As an adult, my mother finally told me more about what happened back then. She said that when my great-grandfather was dying, he would ask for me. They would bring me to him, and I would play near his bed. She said that whenever I was there, he seemed to come back a little. Like seeing me helped him hold on. After he passed, she thought I was only grieving in my own childlike way. She thought I missed him. But then came the candy. She said there had been no candy in the house. No one had given it to me. And when I said Grandpa gave it to me, she played along because she didn't want to frighten me. But from that day on, she was afraid. She told me, "I started to feel like it wasn't your grandfather anymore. I was scared something else was using his face." Then she said something I've never forgotten. "I was worried it would take your soul." She said she tried talking to it. She tried yelling at it. She even cursed at it. But nothing changed until the priest came. So what was it? Was it really my great-grandfather, staying just long enough to say goodbye? Was it something darker, pretending to be him? Or was it simply the way a little child tried to understand death before she even knew what death meant? I don't have an answer, but every time I think about him, I remember that old man at the market, leaning on his cane, looking right at me. And I remember smiling at him, like some quiet part of me already knew who he was. I think I was about 6 when this happened, maybe a little younger, and it's one of those memories that has never really loosened its grip on me. It was at my grandparents' house. I stayed there pretty often back then, usually when my mom had to work late or leave early for something the next morning. That night started completely normal. Nothing felt strange. I went to bed, fell asleep, and that should have been the end of it. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. I don't know why, but I suddenly felt like I needed to look out the window. My room was on the second floor, so I got up, went over, and looked outside. My grandparents lived next to an old 4-H camp, and there was a narrow lane that led up to the gate. Right there, under one of the streetlights, was a man. Or at least, I thought it was a man. He was tall and very thin, wearing an old-fashioned coat. Not exactly a trench coat, but something in that family. He also had this long, drooping stocking cap on, the kind that hangs down the back with a little ball at the end. I remember it had stripes, though I can't remember the colors anymore. He had a huge, overstuffed pack on his back, and he was doing something with his hands. I couldn't see what. It looked like he was fiddling with something invisible, or working on some tiny object I couldn't make out. And I just stood there staring. I don't know how long it lasted. Maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Long enough that it felt wrong. Long enough that I knew I wasn't just glancing at someone walking by. Then he stopped moving his hands. He looked straight ahead for a second, and then he snapped his head up and looked directly at me. I still remember the feeling that went through me. It was like my whole spine turned cold and electric at the same time. I tried to keep looking, but he was staring right into my eyes. From where I was, maybe 15 or 20 feet away and one floor up, his face looked extremely pale, and his eyes had this dull glow to them, almost like the way a cat's eyes reflect light in the dark. I got scared and yelled, "Grandpa, help!" I only turned my head away for a couple of seconds. When I looked back, he was gone. Not walking away, not running, just gone. The lane was open and lit by streetlights. There weren't trees or bushes nearby where someone could have ducked behind. I looked everywhere, but there was nothing. My grandpa came running in, and I told him what I'd seen. He looked out the window, then went outside to check around. When he came back, he said there wasn't anyone there. Just the lane, the camp gate, and the empty night. He could tell I was still shaken, so he let me sleep in his room. He made me a little bed out of blankets on the floor, beneath the skylight. I remember lying there, still wide awake, trying to calm down. Through the skylight, I could see part of the big maple tree outside. The wind was moving the branches a little. And then I saw him again. He was crouched on one of the branches, squatting there like he had always been there. I froze completely. I couldn't call out. I couldn't say, "There he is." I couldn't move. Because this was a different room, I couldn't see him as clearly this time. He looked more like a silhouette tucked into the tree. But the eyes were the same. That faint, unnatural glow. He just watched me. It felt like hours, though it was probably only a few minutes. Eventually, somehow, I managed to close my eyes. I must have fallen asleep like that. The next morning, I told my grandparents again about the man outside my bedroom window. They said it was probably someone walking around the camp, and that I just hadn't seen where he went. That did make me feel a little less crazy, because at least I knew I hadn't dreamed the first part. But I never told them about seeing him in the tree. I don't really know why. I think I just didn't want to talk about it. Saying it out loud would have made it too real. Over the years, that memory kept coming back, especially when people talked about strange events or paranormal encounters. I've tried looking into it, but I've never found anything that really matches. It wasn't a hat man thing. There was no fedora, no brimmed hat, nothing like that. It didn't feel evil exactly, just strange, ancient maybe, out of place. His eyes weren't red, and I was too young to have any understanding of drugs or hallucinations or anything like that. Later, when I was around 11, I learned the camp had once been used as a prisoner of war camp for German soldiers during World War II. From what I've read, there doesn't seem to be any record of anything violent happening there. Supposedly, the men worked on farms nearby and were released after the war. So I don't know if that history has anything to do with what I saw. As an adult, I've asked my grandpa if he remembers that night. He always says yes. He remembers me being terrified. He remembers going outside to look. And he remembers not finding a single thing. So that's the story. I've never been able to explain it, and I've never met anyone who saw something quite like it. But if anyone has had a similar experience or has any idea what it might have been, I'd really like to hear about it. I went on a choir tour through Spain and southern France back in 2007. We began in Madrid and eventually made our way toward Toulouse and the Occitanie region. But the experience I still think about most happened in Lourdes, France. Even before we got there, while we were still in Spain, I kept having these strange moments of déjà vu. Not just little flickers either. They felt more like memories brushing up against me from somewhere I couldn't quite name. One of the oddest moments was at the Cathedral of Burgos, As our guide walked us through, I found myself talking with her about the church as if I already knew it. The layout, the details, the feeling of the place, it all felt strangely familiar. At the end of the tour, she looked at me and said, "You know a lot." The next day, a few people from our group who hadn't paid for the tour wanted to see it, so I took them back and basically gave them the same tour myself. I knew where to stop, what to point out, even the order she had done it in. It felt effortless, which made it even more unsettling. But the clearest paranormal experience of the trip happened later, in Lourdes. Lourdes is a small town in southwest France, best known for Saint Bernadette, a teenage shepherd girl who said she saw visions of the Virgin Mary in 1858. On our first day there, our guide mentioned that long before it became a Christian pilgrimage site, Lourdes had been a Roman outpost, and there had once been a temple connected to a water goddess. That detail stayed with me, because Lourdes is full of water imagery. Everywhere you turn, there's water. Holy water, bottles shaped like Mary, streams of pilgrims moving through the town, the baths where people go hoping for healing. It's as if the whole place is flowing. And people really do come there for healing. You see groups of sick pilgrims everywhere, many in wheelchairs, some on stretchers. The most important place is the grotto, where Bernadette had her visions, with the church built above it. I'm not Catholic, but the story of the place had drawn me in. I wanted to go down to the grotto and just feel it for myself. When I arrived, I couldn't go in right away because it was the scheduled time for people on stretchers. In front of the grotto, there was an open space, then several rows of benches, then more space behind them, all enclosed by fencing. Most of the center benches were full, so I found a place at the very back, near the fence, and sat down to wait. The moment I sat, I felt this buzzing. At first it was subtle, but then it grew stronger and stronger until it felt like it was moving through my whole body. The pressure became so intense that my head was pushed downward toward my knees. From the outside, I probably looked like I was praying or genuflecting, but I wasn't doing it on purpose. And through that vibration, I heard a voice. It said, "You will see where Bernadette first saw the lady." I didn't know what to do with that. I'm usually skeptical of things like that, even when they happen to me. So I just held the thought gently and waited. A little while later, the stretchers were moved out of the area, and people began lining up from the center benches to enter the grotto. I moved forward and sat on one of those benches, starting at the left side. As more people came in, I slid along to make room until I ended up at the far right end. Sitting there, I thought maybe I should offer some kind of prayer, or at least something respectful. Since I was on a choir tour, I began silently singing the choral Ave Maria we had been performing. And as I did, the buzzing became overwhelming. Then I started to cry. Not loudly, just silently, with tears coming and coming. The people on the bench around me seemed to understand somehow. No one spoke to me. No one touched me. They simply sat there and gave me space in this incredibly tender, wordless way. When the crying finally passed, I knew I didn't need to go into the grotto. Whatever I had come there for, I had already received it. So I reached down to pick up my backpack. And that's when I saw it. There was a bronze plaque set into the ground right beneath where I had been sitting. It said that this was the spot where Saint Bernadette first saw the Virgin Mary on February 11th, 1858. I had been sitting on that exact place the entire time. I've basically lived in the same house my whole life. My parents built it when I was little, and it's just this normal suburban house in the ACT in Australia. Nothing dramatic, nothing old and crumbling. It was built on cleared farm paddocks, so you wouldn't really expect it to have any kind of history clinging to it. But even so, over the years, Strange things have come and gone there. My grandmother, Grace, was always spiritually sensitive. She had seen ghosts before, and she believed in helping them move on. My mum, Michelle, is sensitive too, but she doesn't like admitting it. She'll acknowledge just enough to say, "Yes, something is there," and then she'll shut the door on the whole idea. Me, I've never actually seen anything clearly, which is funny because there were times I wanted to, especially in places that were supposed to be haunted. But I've always been able to sense things and hear things really clearly. The worst experience happened when I was about 10. I was in my bedroom at night. My bed was pushed up against the wall on one side, and I was lying facing the wall because that was my rule. I didn't want to roll over and see something standing there if something happened to be there. I wasn't asleep. I wasn't even close to drifting off. Then suddenly, I felt this huge dark presence behind me. It wasn't like getting chills. It wasn't that prickly feeling people talk about. It was heavier than that. It felt physical, almost warm in this smoky, suffocating way, and the whole room seemed to go silent around it. Like all the ordinary nighttime sounds had been swallowed. I knew, instantly, that whatever it was bad. I didn't feel it staring at me exactly, but I knew it was focused on me, and I knew it hated me. Not in a vague way, it felt personal. After a few seconds, I managed to call out for my mom. It came out weak because I was terrified, but I yelled as loudly as I could. The second I did, the force of it faded a little. Not gone, just less intense. It was like the main weight of it pulled back, but this thick residue stayed in the air around my voice and around my bed. I could still feel it there, and I had this awful awareness that it knew I knew it was there. My mom didn't get up right away. She was a couple of rooms away, and I could hear her calling back to me, not really understanding how scared I was. And somehow, that thing seemed almost amused. It didn't move at first. It just stayed there while I kept calling for her, refusing to turn around, refusing to look. Then slowly, it began to drift away. Not walk, not vanish. It sort of slid out of the room, like smoke pulling itself through a crack. By the time my mom actually got to me, it was gone. There was nothing left for anyone else to sense. No chill, no weird atmosphere. Just me, absolutely shaken. That was the scariest thing that ever happened to me in that house. But it wasn't the only thing. There were others I used to call the roommates. Growing up, I always had the sense that there were maybe 3 or 4 different presences around the house. One of them hated me being in the lounge room at night. That room always felt wrong after dark. Once, when I was about 11, I had a friend sleep over. He was lying on the couch bed in the lounge room, watching TV, and he saw a hand reflected in the screen. It looked like it was reaching over the back of the couch. Nobody else was in the room with him. Then there were 2 others that felt more spread out through the house. They weren't as aggressive. They were just there. I'd hear footsteps at night, heavy enough to make the carpet shift and crinkle. I'd get that feeling of something moving around outside my bedroom door. It made me avoid leaving my room at night, and when I did have to go out, I'd rush. My mom always brushed it off. But later, after my parents moved out and I started renting the house from them, the roommates became more noticeable. They'd bang on walls, or they'd send out these strange little pulses in the atmosphere, just enough to grab my attention. And weirdly, it was usually helpful. Like if I'd left a stove knob turned on, I'd hear a sudden knock from a part of the house that never made noise. If I had a window open and was about to leave, something would pull my attention toward it. It was never in places with wiring or pipes or anything that could easily explain it. Eventually, I started joking out loud that their rent was keeping me from burning the house down or getting kicked out. I'd tell them, "You know, if I lose this place, you're homeless too." I never felt like they were good, exactly, but they didn't feel evil either. Then, at one point, the energy in the house started changing. There were more negative things around, things that made me feel afraid before I even opened a door. I'd stand in the hallway and just know something was on the other side. Certain rooms felt like something was waiting in them, not just present, but hunting. That was different. When I told my mom, she said I should sage the house. So I did. I went through the whole place and saged every room. And after that, the roommates were gone. All of them. Even the nasty one in the lounge room. I spent a lot of my 20s being the person people called when they thought something in their house needed to be cleared out. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I do. I've always had one foot planted pretty firmly in skepticism. Most of the time, a haunted house is just an old house with bad pipes, loose floorboards, and a draft that knows how to make an entrance. But I'd been involved with occult work and folk magic for most of my life, and word had gotten around that I didn't scare easily. Also, I didn't charge anyone, so I got invited into a lot of places where people were frightened, and I did my best to help. Most of it was ordinary. Some of it wasn't. I do believe there are things just outside the edge of what we can see. I don't think we catch glimpses of them often, but I think it happens. There was this spiritualist camp a few hours from where I lived, and I used to go there when I needed a little break from regular life. It had an old hotel that was advertised, very cheerfully, as haunted. But honestly, it never felt frightening to me. It felt small and warm and strange in a charming way, with this huge wraparound porch where you could sit with a book and hear every creak of the building breathing around you. The whole camp was tiny. The hotel, a few little shops, some cottages, and not much else. If you wanted food after a certain hour, your best bet was a vending machine with a heroic amount of dust on it. I'd gone enough times that I knew people there. That particular weekend, I was staying at the hotel with my mom. The building was old enough that the rooms were a little uneven. Same price for all of them, but every other room had a larger bathroom. The smaller bathrooms were so small you practically had to negotiate with the sink to turn around. So my mom and I booked 2 of the larger rooms. I think they were even numbered, with one room between us. When we arrived, I noticed my room looked emptier than usual. The hotel seemed to be changing furniture or doing some kind of slow-motion remodeling. There was a bed, a little table, maybe a chair, but not much else. At the time, I didn't think much of it. That first day was exactly what you'd expect from a weekend at a spiritualist camp. I caught up with friends, bought a little bag of crystals I absolutely did not need, wandered through the shops, and read on the porch until the light went soft. That night, my friend Mara came by my room. The rooms had 2 doors, one that opened into the hotel hallway, and one that opened out onto the porch. She knocked on the porch door, and somehow we ended up upstairs in an area where there weren't any guest rooms. I was wearing this long white nightgown, and the hotel had all this antique, slightly eerie decor, so Mara wanted to take some pictures. Nothing serious, just dramatic little ghost girl photos for fun. There was an old fainting couch up there, so I lay down on it while she took a few pictures. Then we laughed about it, went back downstairs, and each went off to bed. The next morning, I woke up and started getting ready. While I was brushing my hair, I noticed the upper left side of my head was sore. Really sore. Tender in that deep, bruised way, like I'd been knocked there. But I hadn't hit my head. There wasn't a headboard. There wasn't anything above me or beside me that made sense. I hadn't fallen. I hadn't woken up in pain during the night. I was confused, but it didn't seem serious, so I let it go. The second day was more of the same. I tried to get lunch at the little hotel restaurant, but it was closed. I bought a singing bowl from one of the shops. I visited another friend. I spent more time on the porch. That night, I went to bed without modeling dramatically on any antique furniture. Then the next morning, I woke up with a red, swollen welt on the left side of my forehead, right at the hairline. Same side. It was tender to touch, and later it bruised. That's when I stopped being casual about it. I spent hours in that room trying to figure out how I could have done it to myself. I looked at the furniture. There wasn't much of it. I considered sleepwalking, even though I've never done that in my life. But even if I had, what would I have walked into? The doors were locked. Nothing in the room was high enough or positioned in a way that made sense. I sleep on my right side too, so the left side of my forehead, the side that had been hit twice, would have been exposed while I was asleep. I must have looked absolutely ridiculous. This woman in her 20s pacing around an almost empty hotel room, trying to reenact a head injury with no weapon, no furniture, and no suspect except the air itself. I came up with nothing. Before we checked out, I told the woman at the front desk what had happened. The front desk was inside the gift shop, surrounded by crystals, tarot decks, fairy statues, incense, and all the usual beautiful little witchy clutter. She just looked at me and said, "The hotel isn't haunted." And honestly, I still don't know whether that was the official answer she was supposed to give, or if she genuinely believed it, or if she'd said it 1,000 times and wanted no part of whatever I was describing. It was one of the strangest exchanges I've ever had. My mom and I were only booked for the weekend, so we checked out that morning. I stayed at that hotel again after that visit, and it never happened again. No bruises, no sore spots, nothing. Just those 2 mornings. I even mentioned it to my therapist later, expecting her to be the reasonable voice in the room. She listened quietly and then said, "Do you think it followed you home?" Which was not, I will tell you, the comforting clinical response I had been hoping for. I think the reason that weekend has stayed with me so strongly is because, in all the strange situations I've been in, I had never been physically touched in a way that left a mark. I'd heard things. I'd felt things. I'd seen things out of the corner of my eye that made the room feel suddenly too small. But this was different. This was contact. And I don't know what caused it. I still don't. But it changed the way I think about the unseen. Seeing something move in the dark is frightening, yes. Hearing footsteps when no one is there is frightening. But being asleep, completely vulnerable, and waking up marked by something you can't explain? That message landed very clearly. Whatever it was, it wanted me to know it could reach me. I'm 28 now, and I was born in Italy. My family was pretty ordinary on the surface. I had one sister, Elena, who was a few years older than me, and for the most part, life looked normal from the outside. But inside the house, it wasn't always peaceful. My parents argued a lot. It never became physical, thankfully, but there was plenty of shouting, insults, and tension hanging in the air. So my sister and I both learned early on that being outside was easier than being home. That's important, because it explains why I spent so much time at my cousin's place when I was younger. And it's also worth saying that my sister and I were completely different when it came to anything paranormal. She loved that stuff. She wanted something strange to happen to her. She wanted a story. Me? Absolutely not. Give me true crime, serial killers, dangerous people, whatever. I can handle that. But ghosts, spirits, things you can't explain? No, thank you. Which is funny because for some reason, those things kept happening to me. Never to her. The first place where it really started was my cousin Marco's house. I spent a lot of time there from around 12 or 13 until I was about 18. Sometimes I stayed for days, sometimes weeks. Anything to avoid being home during the worst of the arguments. His house wasn't really just a house. It was more like a villa. There was a huge lake in the middle of the property, with land all around it. If you walked slowly around the lake without exploring, just following the path, it could take about an hour. The place was old, too. Historically, it had once been near an ancient Roman port before the landscape changed. The sea wasn't far away at all. The house itself had 2 floors, and when we were younger, my cousins and I always slept in the same room. It didn't matter if we had to bring in extra beds or squeeze together. The house was big, isolated, and surrounded by darkness at night. None of us wanted to sleep alone. At first, nothing happened. Then, when I was 13, I had my first experience. That night, there were 4 of us sleeping in the room. Me, my younger cousin Luca, my older cousin Marco, and my aunt. It was a completely normal night. Nothing strange before bed. No weird feelings. No bad atmosphere. We just went to sleep. Then, in the middle of the night, I woke up. No sound, no reason. I just opened my eyes and sat up. And in front of me, there was something. I call it something because I still don't really know how to describe it. It didn't have a clear face or a solid shape. The closest I can get is this. Imagine someone standing there with a white sheet or blanket draped over them so you can only see the outline underneath. And somehow, I knew it was female. I couldn't see a face, I couldn't see details, but the shape felt feminine, and I just knew. The strange part is that I didn't panic. Normally, I'm a very rational person, maybe too rational. So instead of screaming or waking everyone up, I just sat there and tried to explain it away. My first thought was, maybe it's just a blanket on the chair. But then I looked down and realized my blanket was on me. It was winter. I was using it. Then I thought, maybe it's the dog. They had a few dogs, and one of them was a French bulldog with a white patch on its back. Maybe he was curled up on the chair, and my tired brain was turning him into something else. So I looked around. The dog was asleep on the bed beside me, stretched across my cousin's legs. I looked back. The thing was still there. It hadn't moved at all. I stared at it. It stared back, or at least it felt that way. And then, because apparently my teenage brain had no survival instinct, I just shrugged, lay back down, and went to sleep. The next morning, when I fully realized what had happened, I almost freaked out. I kept asking myself why I reacted like that. Why didn't I wake anyone? Why didn't I leave the room? But in that exact moment, I hadn't felt threatened. I hadn't felt fear. It felt peaceful, almost unimportant. And that might be the strangest part of all. I know what time it was, too. There was a TV in front of the bed with a small decoder underneath it that always showed the time. It was 3 a.m. The second experience happened about a year later, when I was 14. Again, it was at my cousin's villa. This time, it was late afternoon in winter, around the end of January. I was with Marco, my aunt, and my uncle, and we were walking around the lake. It was about 5 p.m., so there was still light outside. Everything felt normal. My cousin and I were walking a little ahead of the adults, just a few meters, close enough that all 4 of us could still talk without raising our voices. Eventually, we reached an old stone bridge. You had to cross it to continue around the lake because water passed underneath it. We started walking across, slowly, casually. Then Marco and I heard a voice. A woman's voice. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was soft, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. But it kept repeating, and it was calling our names. both of our names. The sound seemed to move from left to right in front of us, like someone was walking away while whispering, and the voice was getting farther and farther away. It lasted maybe 10 seconds. Of course, the first thing we did was look back at the adults. We thought they were messing with us. But while we could still hear the voice, they were behind us having their own conversation, completely normal. So Marco and I turned back around, moved closer together, and kept walking. Neither of us said anything. What could we say? By the time we reached the end of the bridge, the voice had faded. Maybe 5 seconds later, my aunt called out from behind us. She asked why we hadn't stopped the old man in front of us. But there had been no old man. She said an elderly man had walked right in front of us, crossing from left to right. She described him as wearing strange clothes, old-fashioned, like from another time. The moment she said that, Marco and I ran off the bridge to see if we could find him. There was nobody. No footsteps, no movement, nothing. And that area made it almost impossible for someone to disappear normally. At the end of the bridge, there was grass and the path continuing forward. On the right side, you drop straight toward the lake. On the left, there was a little land, but then a stone wall surrounded the property. It was about 8 or 9 meters tall, covered in bushes and branches. Anyone trying to climb or push through it would have made a lot of noise. We told the adults about the woman's voice. They hadn't heard it. They told us about the old man. We hadn't seen him. And after that, we just finished the walk and never really talked about it again. The third experience was absolutely our fault because we were teenagers, and teenagers are experts at opening doors they shouldn't even knock on. It was Halloween night. I was 16. Same property, same cousin, same general area. At the time, we had gotten really into Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role-playing games. So, naturally, we decided Halloween would be the perfect night to do something scary. There was an old Merle building on the property that we called the Towers. In medieval times, it had apparently been a small structure with 2 towers, one on each side. By then, it was being renovated. Since it was inside my cousin's property, we figured it was fine to go in, as long as we didn't break anything. We brought a Vampire the Masquerade book, some candles and flashlights, and a few things to set the mood. The plan was to play inside the old building. There were 4 of us, me, Marco, Luca, and a friend of ours named Davide. We left around 9 p.m. By the time we reached the building on foot, it was close to 11. The ground floor was unfinished. Concrete, dust, gravel everywhere. No doors or windows yet, just openings covered by those green construction nets workers use to block the view. Below the ground floor, there was a basement, about the same size as the main level. We didn't go down there. It was pitch black, flooded up to the ankles, and looked awful. We knew it was just where workers had been handling the old foundations, but still, no thank you. One tower was still standing on the right side. The left one had already been demolished. At some point, we split up. Marco and Luca went up the tower stairs. Davide and I stayed on the ground floor waiting for them. That's when things started going wrong. First, we heard something fall from the tower above. We assumed it was my cousins trying to scare us, so we laughed it off. We expected that. Then we saw something outside the building. A dark figure ran past one of the openings. The green nets were torn in places, and our flashlights were pointed in that direction, so we could see enough of the outside. It wasn't detailed. It had no face, no clear shape, just a short, human-like shadow moving fast across the opening. Davide and I got nervous, but we still tried to act brave. Then something else fell from the tower. We shouted up at my cousins to stop, telling them it wasn't funny anymore. And right after that, the most impossible thing happened. Dust started lifting from the ground around us. Then footprints began appearing in the dust. Not old footprints, new ones. right in front of us. They moved in a circle around where we were standing, like someone invisible was running around us. But there was nobody there. Nobody. We could see the footprints forming one after another. We could see the dust moving. That was enough. Davide and I ran out of the building, terrified, and waited outside for my cousins. They came down a few minutes later, laughing. We swore at them and told them we knew they had been throwing things down from the tower. They admitted they had thrown a brick. But when we mentioned the second thing falling, and the shadow, and the footprints, they looked genuinely confused. They kept saying they hadn't thrown anything else. They hadn't seen anything. And when they came back down, nothing was different except for the brick they had dropped. After that, we left immediately and decided watching a movie at home was a much better Halloween plan. The rest of the night was quiet. There were other smaller things over the years, too. Not full stories exactly, but strange moments. I had dreams that later came true. Once, I dreamed about my aunt having a baby almost a year before it happened. I knew the baby's name, the sex, and even the day the child would be born. I was right. Another time, the same thing happened with another aunt, more than a year in advance. Again, I dreamed the name, the sex, and the birth date. I was right that time too. Then there was one night at my parents' house when I suddenly woke up at 3 a.m. with this horrible feeling in my chest. My first thought was, I need to call my cousins. There was no reason for it. No dream I remembered. No message. Just that awful feeling and the sudden need to call them. But I talked myself out of it. Because who calls people at 3 a.m. because of a gut feeling? The next morning, my mother rushed into my room and told me something had happened. Lightning had struck my cousin's kitchen, started a fire, and almost hit the gas canister. It happened around 3:30 a.m. Thankfully, Luca had woken up to go to the bathroom, saw the fire, and woke everyone before it became worse. Nothing terrible happened, but I still think about it. And I've promised myself that if I ever get a feeling like that again, I'm calling. For a while, I used to meditate and do certain spiritual practices. I don't know if that had anything to do with the dreams or the experiences, but after I stopped, everything became much quieter. Maybe it's connected. Maybe it isn't. But honestly, I'm not in a hurry to find out. I want to tell you about something that happened to me recently, and even now, I still don't know what to make of it. I'm a disabled woman from South Asia, and for a while now, my living situation has been pretty unstable. My income comes and goes, so I've had to move between shelters, women's hostels, and PG accommodations. If you're not familiar with that, a PG is basically a paying guest setup, where you rent a room or even just a bed in someone's home. Usually, the family lives there too, and sometimes meals are included. It's a very common arrangement where I'm from. At the moment, I'm staying with a family of 6 in a 2-floor house. There's the couple, their children, and the wife's elderly mother. My room is upstairs, and I use a cane to get around, so I don't move quickly or easily. That day, the grandmother and the landlord's wife had gone to the hospital for a medical appointment. The landlord had taken the children out, so by the afternoon, I was completely alone in the house. Now, I usually don't mind being by myself. I actually enjoy quiet most of the time. But that afternoon, the silence felt wrong. The house is normally full of voices, movement, doors opening and closing, the TV, somebody calling for somebody else. With all of that gone, the place felt unnaturally still. I remember feeling like something was off, like I wasn't really alone, even though I knew I was supposed to be. I tried to ignore it. I sat down and did the usual things, checked emails, looked through job listings, tried to stay focused on ordinary tasks. And then I heard it. Someone called out, Mole. That's a Malayalam word older people use affectionately, like saying, dear girl, or daughter. And the voice sounded exactly like the grandmother's. So of course, my first thought was that maybe she and the wife had come back earlier than expected. It wasn't common for her to come upstairs because her knees were very bad, but it wasn't impossible either. The children's room was on the same floor as mine, so I thought maybe she had come up looking for them and didn't realize they were out. I got up slowly, leaning on my cane, and opened my door. There was no one there. The hallway was empty, completely quiet. And I just stood there, confused, because there was no way she could have called me and then gone back downstairs that fast. She struggled with movement as much as I did, maybe more. I told myself maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe my mind was reacting to the strange silence. Then I heard it again. This time it came from the side, near the utility area next to my room. I answered back as best I could. I have a speech impairment, so calling out loudly isn't easy for me, but I tried. By then I was getting nervous. My mind immediately went to the worst possibility. Maybe the grandmother had fallen somewhere near the terrace. Without really thinking, I stepped out and pulled my room door shut behind me. I still think about that moment. I don't know why, but closing that door felt important somehow. The utility area has the washing machine and some storage, and beyond it, there's an open terrace. During the day, that door is usually left open for air and sunlight. So I walked that way, squinting because the afternoon light was so harsh. And again, there was no one. No grandmother, no movement, nothing. Then suddenly I heard a huge crashing sound from downstairs. She replied that they were still at the hospital and wouldn't be back until evening. She also reminded me that the house had been locked when they left. That message made my stomach drop. Because if they weren't home, then who had called me? And what had made that crashing sound downstairs? At that point, I decided I was not opening my door again for anything. I did a small protection visualization, just something that helps me feel grounded, and stayed where I was. But a little later, I heard the voice again. Same word, same tone, same grandmother's voice. I can't really explain the feeling that came over me. It was like cold fear going straight through my body. And that's when a thought came into my mind that I really didn't want to entertain. What if it was a mimic? I've had other experiences in my life that made me feel sensitive to paranormal things, so once that idea entered my head, I couldn't shake it. It felt like something was trying to draw me out of my room, and the feeling of being watched only got stronger. So I stayed put. I locked the door, played music to drown out every little sound, and kept checking the latch every so often just to reassure myself it was still secure. I got almost no work done after that. I was too shaken. When the family finally came back that evening, I can't tell you how relieved I felt. The house sounded normal again. Voices, footsteps, doors, all the everyday noise came back, and with it, that awful feeling started to lift. Later on, I found out that an old wall clock had somehow come loose and fallen downstairs. So that explains the crashing sound at least. But the voice? I still have no explanation for that. Maybe it was all just a coincidence. Maybe the strange silence got into my head. Maybe I imagined hearing her call me. But I remember it so clearly, and not just once. I heard that voice 3 separate times, and I still find it unsettling that the clock fell while I was near the terrace, right after I'd been drawn out there. So I honestly don't know. Was it stress? Was it my imagination? Or was something trying to lure me outside? I still think about it, and I still don't know what to believe. So, this happened a few years ago, when I was living in an old Victorian terraced house for a couple of years with my children. It was one of those places with a really strange layout because it was built into the side of a hill. You'd come in from the street through the front door, and on that level were the 2 bedrooms my boys used. Then upstairs from there was my room and my youngest daughter Ava's room. She was only about 3 then. And below the street level, down another set of stairs, was the kitchen and living area, with a little sunroom at the back that opened into the garden. From the very beginning, that house just felt off. That's the only way I can explain it. It never felt cozy or settled. It had this heaviness to it, like the air was thick somehow, especially at night. Around that time, I was living there mostly on my own with the kids after separating from my ex-husband, so I kept trying to tell myself I was just stressed and overtired. At first, it was little things. I'd hear what sounded like faint whispering and then complete silence. Sometimes I'd walk into a room and catch the quickest glimpse of something in the corner of my eye, and when I turned, there'd be nothing there. And more than anything, I always had this horrible feeling that I was being watched. I tried not to let myself focus on it because I didn't want to frighten myself. I was there alone with the children most of the time, and I needed to keep it together. But then something happened that I still can't explain, even now. My oldest son, Mason, was about 8 or 9 at the time, and he'd become obsessed with the idea of starting his own YouTube channel. He was always filming little videos in his room, just silly clips, and I'd check them before he uploaded anything. His bedroom was at the front of the house. His bed was pushed up against the wall under the window, and we always kept the curtains shut because the house sat close enough to the street that it felt exposed. They were thick, dark curtains that met in the middle. One day I was watching back one of his videos, and there was this tiny moment where the camera slowed just enough for me to catch something near the curtains. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, so I rewound it and watched it again. Then I started going through it frame by frame. And honestly, I still get chills thinking about it. What I saw looked like an arm. Not just a shadow, not the curtain shifting. An actual arm and hand seemed to come out from the narrow gap where the curtains met, reaching toward the pillow end of my son's bed. I remember just staring at the screen, thinking, no, that can't be right. But the more I replayed it, the more certain I felt about what I was seeing. The window itself was raised above street level, so it wouldn't have made sense for someone outside to cast that kind of shape across the curtains anyway. At the time, I took screenshots and sent them straight to my sister along with the video. I didn't say much because I didn't want to influence what she saw, but almost immediately she said she could see it too. That was the moment everything changed for me in that house. Up until then, I'd been trying to rationalize all the strange feelings and little incidents. But seeing that on video and having someone else confirm it made me feel, for the first time, like there really was something wrong there. And to be honest, that was more than enough. I need to tell you about something that happened around 12 years ago when I was finishing high school. Even now when I think about it, I still get that strange feeling in my chest, like part of me is back there. At the time, I had 2 separate circles of friends. They knew of each other, but we never really all spent time together. One Friday night, right before the weekend, I went to a party at this huge house with my boyfriend and my best friend. There were people everywhere, music, noise, the usual kind of crowded night. But the second I walked in, I felt completely off. Not in a dramatic way at first, just this heavy, sinking feeling. I didn't drink. I didn't really talk much. I just followed them around like I was there physically, but not really there at all. As the night went on, it got worse. I felt deeply sad, almost panicked, and then nauseous too, even though I barely ate a thing. By around 1 in the morning, I kept begging them to leave because I couldn't take it anymore. Eventually we did, and the 3 of us ended up crashing in the same bed at my friend's place. They fell asleep, but I didn't sleep for a second. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw these violent, horrifying flashes. Blood, broken bodies, people suffering. It wasn't just that I was seeing them. It felt like I was somehow creating them, like I was responsible for those images, and that made me feel sick with guilt. I remember lying there in the dark, crying as quietly as I could so I wouldn't wake anyone up. Early the next morning, I left without really explaining much. I just wanted to go home and see my mom. I had this desperate need for her to hold me and tell me everything was okay. When I got there, that's exactly what I did. I tried to explain what had happened, and she told me it was probably stress, exhaustion, maybe anxiety catching up with me. After I ate a little and stopped feeling sick to my stomach, I tried to rest. But the images came back. Later that day, I called the friend I'd been with the night before and asked if she wanted to go out for a bit. I thought maybe getting out of the house would help. We met up, walked around some shops, just trying to have a normal afternoon. I didn't tell her what had really happened. I was too ashamed, and honestly, I didn't even know how to put it into words. Then something happened that made everything feel even stranger. We were about to cross the street when a scooter rode past us. The guy driving it had square glasses and brown, slightly wavy hair peeking out from under his helmet. He turned his head and smiled at us as he went by. My friend nudged me and joked that he was obviously checking me out. I laughed awkwardly and said, with total certainty, "No way, that's Soraya's brother." She laughed and told me that was impossible. He lived in Paris, she said. He was always working. There was no reason he'd be there. And that's when the fear really hit me. You need to understand, at that time, I was supposed to do an internship at the graphic design studio run by my friend Soraya's older brother. I knew what he looked like, and I was suddenly absolutely sure I had just seen him. I stopped walking and told my friend I needed to go home. She looked confused, but she could tell something was wrong, so she let me go. The second I got home, I went straight to my mother, crying and shaking. I told her everything this time. The party, the sickness, the images, the scooter, all of it. My mom has always been very open-minded, especially about things people can't easily explain. She told me that my grandmother had been sensitive to things like that too. Then she asked me to sit down on her bed, close my eyes, and try to clear my mind, so I did. After a little while, she asked me, "What do you see?" I said, "Nothing." Then she said, "Think of a letter." And immediately one came to me. It felt absurd because the moment I saw it in my mind, I already knew exactly who it connected to. She told me to say it out loud, so I half laughed and said, "It's the letter S." She asked what that meant to me, and I said, "It's strange because it makes me think of Soraya, and earlier I thought I saw her brother on that scooter." My mother's face changed right away. She told me to call Soraya. I didn't want to. I told her that would be way too weird. We weren't close enough for me to suddenly call her out of nowhere, and I didn't even have her number anymore. But my mother insisted. She told me to get it from a mutual friend. So eventually I did. I called. She answered almost immediately, and the second I heard her voice, something dropped inside me. I asked very awkwardly, "Are you okay?" She sounded stunned, almost irritated, and said, "Why are you calling me?" And then, without any lead-up at all, she said, "No, I'm not okay. Milo killed himself." Milo was her brother. I just broke. I started crying right there on the phone and apologizing over and over, even though I barely knew what I was apologizing for. She started crying too, and then she asked me why I had called her at that exact moment, because he had died the night before. The night I had been awake, vomiting, seeing those unbearable flashes. I told her everything. I told her about the party, about not being able to sleep, about the images, and about seeing someone who looked exactly like him on a scooter that afternoon. She told me he did have a scooter in Paris, but he had died there the day before. So what I saw made no sense. I was terrified she would think I was cruel or unstable, or that she'd never want to speak to me again. But that's not what happened. A few days later, she came to my house, and I told her the whole story in person. She told me more about her brother, about what had happened, and about the note he left behind. She was actually a very rational person, not someone who usually believed in things like signs or unexplained connections. But she never once doubted that what I told her was real to me. And from that moment on, something changed between us. We formed this incredibly deep bond, built out of grief, mystery, and a shared sense that something had happened that neither of us could fully explain. Even now, all these years later, that story still stays with us. And honestly, I think it always will. So a few months ago, a group of us rented this cabin by a quiet lake for the weekend. Later that night, some friends and I went down to a little bar nearby. My wife, Mara, stayed back at the house by herself. I barely drank anything, maybe a beer or two, and when I got back, I was just tired and ready to crash. I walked into the bedroom, and it was almost completely dark. The only thing I could really make out was the shape of Mara lying in bed. I slipped in beside her, facing her, and for a second I thought she looked off. Like maybe she was sitting up a little, or leaning forward in some strange way. So I whispered, "Hey, what are you doing?" And then I heard her answer me. But her voice didn't come from where I thought I was looking. It came from lower down, from where her head actually was on the pillow. That's the moment every part of me went cold. I kept staring into the dark, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, and little by little, I realized it wasn't Mara at all. Whatever I was looking at was standing at the edge of the bed, leaning over us. It was tall, way too tall, maybe 8 feet, maybe more. Just this black shape, darker than the room itself. And as I stared at it, it didn't step closer exactly. It was more like its face stretched toward me. Slowly, deliberately, until it was right there, inches from mine. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I was completely frozen. All I could do was look at it. Its eyes were tiny and orange, like glowing beads, and its pupils looked pin-sharp and black. I didn't even fully process the rest of its face in that moment, because I was so locked in on those eyes. Then Mara looked at me and said, "What? Did you see something?" And I just said, "I don't want to say anything." She immediately sat up and said, "No, you need to tell me if you saw something." I admitted that I had, but I still couldn't bring myself to explain what it was. I just told her, "Please don't panic. Just try to relax." But she was already scared. I could feel it. So we both got up and hurried out into the main room, where everyone else was still hanging out. The second we got out there, Mara said, "Okay, I need to tell y'all something. While you were gone, I kept feeling like someone was outside the bedroom door." She started describing how she could see a little strip of light under the door, and every so often, it looked like there were feet standing on the other side. Just standing there, not moving. She said it happened more than once, like someone had been lingering outside the room for hours. Then she said she'd drift off, wake up again, and sometimes the shadow would be gone. But one time, she said, she saw something else. She said it looked like a figure crawling low across the floor toward the bed on all fours. And then she described its face. She said it had these tiny orange eyes and this huge grin full of jagged teeth. I just stopped breathing, because that was exactly what I had seen, and I had not told her any of those details. Not one. Up until then, I hadn't said a word about the eyes, or the face, or anything. So hearing her describe the same thing in front of everybody just shook me in a way I can't really explain. Some of our friends kind of laughed nervously, like maybe she was messing with them, or maybe we were just freaked out from being in an unfamiliar place. But I wasn't laughing. I couldn't. I was just sitting there, staring into space, trying to process the fact that whatever I saw, she had seen too. And then, before I could even tell her that, we all heard something slam onto the floor in that bedroom. Not a soft sound, a sharp, clear drop. Enough that everyone heard it. There was nothing there. Nothing on the floor, nothing out of place. No cup, no phone, no book, no loose object. Nothing. The room looked exactly the way we'd left it. That somehow made it worse. The next day, we found out there was a small old burial plot behind the cabin, fenced off near the back tree line, almost directly outside the bedroom window where we had been sleeping. I don't know what to make of that, and I'm not trying to claim I have some explanation. Maybe there's folklore tied to that land. Maybe there isn't. I honestly still don't know. What I do know is that Mara and I both saw something that night, and even now, telling this story out loud still gives me chills. I really haven't talked about it much since it happened, because every time I do, it takes me right back to that room, to that darkness, and to that face leaning in close enough to touch mine. I want to share something that happened to me when I was around 13, during one of the darkest times in my life. Back then, I was carrying so much anger. My home life was painful, and my father was abusive. I was full of violent thoughts, and I was in such a broken state of mind that I was even imagining doing something terrible to him. I'm only sharing that because I think it matters to understand where I was emotionally. I was deeply drawn to dark things then. I loved to draw, but most of what came out of me was death, bodies, shadows, always in black, white, and red. Then one afternoon, I was sitting at home drawing like I usually did. I wasn't planning anything specific. I rarely did. I just let my hand move and followed whatever showed up. But that day, something different happened. Instead of another dark image, I started drawing a flower. And not just that, it had color. Soft, vivid color. I remember pausing and thinking how strange that felt, because it was so unlike anything I normally made. That's when I became aware of this bright light in front of me. It was almost like a spotlight, but not harsh, just incredibly strong and impossible to ignore. I was completely awake. I wasn't dreaming, and it didn't feel imaginary in the moment. The presence felt ancient, older than anything I could explain. It didn't speak with words exactly. It was more like thoughts arriving directly in my mind, and sometimes it communicated through images instead. The first thing it asked was whether it could come in. I remember being unsure. A part of me wondered whether saying yes might be a mistake, but it didn't feel threatening. It felt calm, steady, almost kind. So even though I didn't really understand what it meant, I said yes. The moment I agreed, I was overwhelmed by this feeling of love. Real love. The kind that is so deep and complete that it almost breaks you open. I had never felt anything like it before. It was like every hateful, bitter part of me was being seen and held without judgment. I started asking questions the way a young teenager would. I asked if it was an angel. I had gone to Catholic school, even though I wasn't really religious, so that was the first thing that came to mind. It said no. Then I asked if it was God. Again, no. So I asked, then what are you? And somehow, it showed me, but not in a way I could really understand. What I saw or sensed was something ancient beyond language, something that felt older than history, older even than time itself. I know that sounds impossible, but that's the closest description I have. I asked other questions too. Why is there so much suffering in the world? Why are we here? What is the point of any of this? I honestly can't remember all of the answers now. A lot of it faded, almost like it was meant to. But I do remember being shown things, images, pieces of the world, moments that felt real and alive, as if I were seeing beyond myself for a little while. At some point, my mother came into the room, and I remember thinking, why can't she see this? That was the first moment I realized whatever was happening was somehow happening inside my awareness, even though it felt completely real. Before it left, it told me something that stayed with me forever. It said that one day I would try to take my own life, and it asked me not to do it. It made me promise. At that age, that thought had never really crossed my mind, so hearing that felt shocking and distant. But I promised anyway. When the presence left, I felt different, truly different. It was as if something heavy and poisonous had been washed out of me. I felt clean inside, lighter. The rage that had consumed me didn't vanish all at once forever, but something in me had changed. I was not the same person after that day. I remember asking whether I would ever see it again. I don't remember the response, but I assume it was no, because I never did. Years later, there was a time when I did try to end my life. And in that moment, I remembered the promise I had made all those years before. That memory is part of why I'm still here. I also didn't fully keep my promise to stop searching. Over the years, I looked for people who had experienced something similar. I found strange connections, stories that echoed parts of mine, and questions I still can't answer. Even now, I can't tell you exactly what that presence was. I only know what it did. It met me in a moment when I was full of darkness, and for a brief time, it replaced that darkness with something I had never known before. Love, peace, and the sense that maybe my life was meant to continue. You know, what happened to my mother is still really hard for me to put into just one word. It wasn't exactly a premonition, not in the usual sense. It wasn't like she felt something terrible was about to happen. It was more like she somehow stepped into the weight of something terrible that had already happened, years before she was ever there. This took place a long time ago, and I'm not sharing it because I expect answers. Honestly, I just want to tell it the way it was told to me, because it stayed with me. My mother, Marina, was born in Greece and lived there until she was 18. When she was around 15, she took a trip with her father, her uncle, and aunt, and 2 cousins to my grandfather's village in the Peloponnese, in southern Greece. They were traveling from Larissa, where my mother had grown up, so it was a long journey. At one point, the family stopped in a mountain village to rest before continuing on. While everyone else settled in for a while, my grandfather invited my mother to come take a short walk with him. She went happily. She had been enjoying the trip, enjoying the company, and there was nothing wrong with her mood at all. She wasn't upset, anxious, or troubled in any way. But during that walk, my grandfather led her toward a hill at the edge of the village. And as they got closer, everything changed. She told me that out of nowhere, this awful feeling came over her. Not just fear, but something deeper. A crushing sadness, panic, dread. She said it felt like her heart was being squeezed. The closer they came to that hill, the worse it got, until she finally told my grandfather she couldn't bear it. He immediately turned around and brought her back down to a nearby tavern where the rest of the family was waiting. Even the owner noticed something was wrong with her. Once she had a moment to sit down, she tried to explain what she had felt near that hill, how sudden it was, how overwhelming, how completely out of place it seemed. When she finished, my grandfather and the tavern owner looked at her very seriously, and told her what had happened there. The village was Kalavrita. During the German occupation of Greece in World War II, the town suffered one of the worst atrocities in the country. After German soldiers were killed in the area, the occupying forces retaliated against the people of Kalavrita. They looted homes, seized animals and supplies, and gathered the civilians. Then they took the male population, from teenage boys to elderly men, up to that hill and executed them. Hundreds were killed there in a single massacre, and only a handful survived. What has always stayed with me is this. When my mother stood near that hill, there was no memorial there yet. No sign, no marker, nothing to tell her what had happened. She didn't know the history, and my grandfather hadn't had the chance to explain it before that feeling hit her. So whatever she felt it without being told. And that's the part I keep coming back to. It unsettles me, of course it does. But it also fascinates me. Because somehow, for one brief moment, it was as if my mother brushed up against the memory of that place before anyone ever spoke it aloud. Hey, I'm sharing this because maybe someone out there has gone through something similar, and maybe hearing this will make them feel a little less alone. I know some people would probably hear me talk about this and assume I'm unstable or completely detached from reality, but I've seen several mental health professionals, 4 actually, and every one of them told me the same thing. I'm grounded. I know what's real around me. That's part of what makes this so hard to explain. When this first started, I told myself it had to be connected to substance use. That seemed like the only explanation that made any kind of sense. So after a few months, I checked myself into rehab, honestly believing things would clear up once I got clean. But they didn't. They got worse. At first, I thought maybe I had damaged my brain somehow. I kept trying to make it fit into something understandable. But as time passed, it stopped feeling like something I could explain away. It felt like I was living with voices that had no right to be there. Different ones came and went, a few sounding familiar, but there was one main male voice that stayed constant. And somehow, they seemed able to shift in intensity. Sometimes quieter when I was talking to someone, sitting in an appointment, or trying to focus, and other times unbearably loud, like they just didn't care how overwhelmed I was. Before all of this, I had never experienced anything like auditory or visual hallucinations. Not once in my life. And the substance I had been using wasn't even something people normally associate with that kind of thing, which only made it more confusing. About 3 months in, I entered treatment. Even there, the therapists and psychologists couldn't really explain why things kept escalating instead of settling down. I remember leaving rehab after more than a month sober, hoping that would be the turning point. But the voices were still there. If anything, they were sharper, meaner, more constant. And now, here I am many months later, and they still haven't let up. They almost never answer me directly. Most of the time, they just repeat things back to me, or twist my own thoughts into something cruel. In the beginning, I tried so hard to turn it into something useful. I thought, maybe if this is making me more aware of my negative thoughts, I can use that awareness to grow. And for a while, I actually did. I worked hard to change the way I spoke to myself. But eventually, the exhaustion caught up with me. Because this isn't just frightening, it's draining. Completely draining. It feels like being invaded in the one place you always thought was untouchable. And when the worst thoughts you've ever had are thrown back at you, again and again, day after day, eventually it wears you down. It takes the life out of you. Over time, it's felt like whatever this is has changed. It's not just voices anymore. Sometimes it feels like thoughts show up that don't belong to me. Other times, it's like my own thinking gets interrupted or redirected, almost like someone reaching into the middle of a sentence and changing where it ends. That part is especially hard to describe because I know how strange it sounds. But it's real to me. It is terrifying. And maybe one of the loneliest parts is that I don't feel like I can talk about it openly. I feel isolated, lost, worn down. I feel like I've been pushed so far from myself that I hardly recognize the person trying to survive this. I was raised believing that no matter what happened in life, your mind was the one place no one could ever take from you, that your thoughts were your own. So living through something that makes that feel untrue has shaken me to my core. I've also known people with schizophrenia, and what I'm going through doesn't match what I've personally seen in them. I'm not losing my grip on reality. I know where I am. I know what day it is. I can still function, at least on the surface, but less and less as time goes on. The constant pressure of this, from the moment I wake up to the moment I fall asleep, and even in my dreams, has worn me down to almost nothing. I wish I had answers. I really do. I've spent month after month researching, asking questions, trying treatments, pleading for relief, begging for this to stop. And I still don't know what this is, or why it's happening, or how to make it end. The only reason I'm telling this now is because maybe somebody listening has felt this same kind of fear and confusion. Maybe somebody else is sitting alone with something they can't explain, thinking no one could possibly understand. And I just want to say, I hear you. You're not the only one struggling to make sense of something that feels unbearable. I hope there's an answer somewhere. I hope there's a way through this. And I hope that whatever is behind this pain, whatever name it eventually gets, can someday be understood, and that the people living through it can finally get their lives back. Because that's all I want. I just want my mind to feel like mine again. I want to tell you about someone I loved very much. I'll call her Jade. She died by suicide almost 4 years ago, and honestly, the kind of grief that follows something like that is hard to explain unless you've lived it. There was so much pain, so many questions, and so much healing that all of us had to work through just to begin making sense of what happened and how deeply it affected us. Since she passed, a lot of us have felt like she still reaches out in little ways. Some of the signs have been subtle, some impossible to ignore. And this is one of the experiences that stayed with me most. Back in late fall of 2024, I opened Snapchat and started looking through my memories. The second I clicked into that section, the app started acting strange. It was glitching in a way I'd never seen before, and after maybe 10 seconds, a picture of Jade and me opened all by itself. I just sat there staring at it. Then, about a week later, I dreamed about her. I'd only dreamed of her once since she passed, so this was rare. And this dream felt unbelievably real. We were just together, hanging out like old times, talking like nothing had changed. I remember feeling confused the entire time, thinking, "You're supposed to be gone." But there she was, so present, so familiar, like no time had passed at all. I didn't think too much of it afterward. I just kept moving through the week. Then that Friday, one of our mutual friends, I'll call him Joel, messaged me and said Jade's boyfriend, who I'll call Antonio, had a fight that night and asked if I wanted to come. Antonio, Joel, and I had all been friends for years, and Antonio was actually the reason we met Jade in the first place. So I went, mostly because I wanted to support him. Jade's sister was there too. I'll call her Emmy. After the match, Antonio won, and Emmy was so happy. She kept telling everyone, "My little sister's boyfriend won." She was glowing. Then she invited us all back to her place to celebrate. Later that night, after we'd all settled in and had a few drinks, Emmy suddenly said, "I had a dream about my sister this week. It felt so real. I was looking into her eyes and touching her hair." Before I could even process that, Antonio said, "I dreamed about her this week too. We were just hanging out and talking." I remember sitting there in complete shock. Then I told them I dreamed about her too. Emmy just smiled at us while we talked. Joel looked stunned. 3 of us, all dreaming about Jade around the same time, all saying the same thing, that it felt real. That's when Emmy started telling us how often Jade sends signs. She said, "My sister loves messing with lights and technology. If I'm having a hard day and I ask her for a sign, later on the lights in my house will start flickering." That hit me hard because I'd had my own strange experiences too. I shared them, and Joel shared some of his. Emmy just listened with this calm, knowing smile and said, "She's always around." We all cried that night. Every single one of us. Then about a week later, something happened that I still can't fully explain. When I came back, I picked up my phone to call him and say I was ready. I opened my recent calls and just froze. The last outgoing call on my phone was to Jade. Not my friend, not a misdial to someone living. Jade. I felt my whole body go cold. I called my friend back nearly in tears. I've had signs from her before, but something that direct? That almost never happens. I was trying to pull myself together while I talked to him, and when he got there, the first thing he said was, "Why is the light on in the room next to yours?" I said, "You mean the living room?" He said, "No, the other room, the one farther down." That's when I realized he was talking about my parents' bedroom. My parents had left for a trip over a week earlier. No one had gone into that room since they left. And immediately, I thought about what Emmy had said, how Jade liked to play with lights. So I walked down the hall, opened the door, saw the light on, and just stood there for a second. Then I switched it off and went on with my night. But inside, I knew. I knew. She still watches over me, over our friends, over her family. And whatever love really is, I believe this much with my whole heart. It does not end just because someone dies. So this all started about a year and a half ago, right after my family moved again. My dad's in the military, so moving around was just a normal part of life for us. We were staying in an apartment at first. Nothing unusual, just the usual temporary setup while everything got sorted out. A few nights after we got there, I was sitting on the couch watching TV with my brothers and sister. Everything felt completely normal until, out of nowhere, I got this strange feeling, like something had entered the room through the window. I turned and looked right away, but the window was shut and locked. My siblings were sitting right beside me, so it wasn't any of them moving around. Then, just a moment later, I felt that same presence again, except this time it seemed to be near the door across the room. When I looked over, the door was actually shifting a little, like it had been nudged. I remember feeling unsettled, but I told myself it was nothing. About 2 weeks later, we moved into a house not far from that apartment complex. For the first few nights, I was sleeping alone in my room on a borrowed air mattress. That's when I started hearing it. Breathing. Slow, steady breathing, like someone was standing right beside me in the dark. At first, I thought maybe the mattress had a leak or something, but I checked, and it definitely wasn't that. Even after I got a regular mattress, the sound kept happening. Only at night. Only when I was alone. I tried to explain it away, tried to find some logical cause, but I never could. After a while, I kind of trained myself to ignore it. I didn't like it, but I got used to it. Then one night, I looked toward the corner of my room and saw a figure standing there, just still, watching me. I can't even explain the fear I felt in that moment. I was frozen. I didn't scream, didn't move, didn't do anything. The next morning, I convinced myself it had to be sleep paralysis. That made the most sense, because surely if someone had really been standing in my room, I would have reacted, right? For a few days, nothing happened. Then one afternoon, I went walking in the woods near our neighborhood. There was this trail people used sometimes, and I'd gone there just to clear my head. At one point, between the trees, I saw the same figure. The exact same shape I'd seen in my room. I remember staring, trying to make sense of it, and when I stepped closer, it was just gone. That night, it came back. Same corner, same silence, same feeling that the room wasn't mine anymore. But this time, it didn't stay there. It moved closer, slowly, until it was standing right next to my bed, just staring down at me. And again, I did nothing. I was too scared to even breathe properly. The next morning, I told myself the same thing I had before: sleep paralysis, bad dream, overactive imagination, anything to make it feel less real. But the night after that was different. I woke up and it was already there, standing over me. I could feel it before I even opened my eyes all the way. Then it leaned down and reached toward my face. The second it touched me, I felt this rush of fear so intense it didn't even feel human. It was pure terror, deeper than anything I had ever known. I jerked awake fully, and even though I was definitely conscious then, the fear didn't go away. It stayed. I turned on the light immediately and sat there for the rest of the night, too afraid to go back to sleep. It took me at least an hour, maybe longer, before I could even think clearly again. I still don't know what really happened. Maybe there's a rational answer. Maybe there isn't. All I know is that after that night, whatever it was never came back. Later on, I started hearing other stories from people around the neighborhood. Different people, different experiences, but the details were always strangely similar, especially the part about the figure. Always a shadow-like shape, usually just watching, sometimes knocking something over before disappearing. From everything I heard, I was the only one who ended up with actual physical marks. So honestly, I don't know what to call it. Maybe that neighborhood was haunted. Maybe it was all coincidence. Maybe it was something none of us understood. But I know what I felt. I know what I saw. And I know those scars are real. I was probably around 9 years old when this happened, and now that I'm almost 42, I can still remember it so clearly. That's what's always stayed with me. It never faded like most childhood memories do. It still feels sharp, like it happened in some strange pocket outside of time. I remember being asleep, and then suddenly I was awake. I don't know what woke me up. I just remember opening my eyes and seeing this figure standing in the dim light near the top of the stairs. From my bed, it was maybe 12 or 14 feet away, standing on that little landing just above the last few steps. And the strangest part is, I wasn't scared. That's what never made sense to me, because as a kid, I was terrified of the dark. I was the kind of child who imagined things in every shadow. But in that moment, I didn't feel fear at all. I felt calm, curious more than anything. I also remember being aware that something about the moment felt wrong or different, like I was in some kind of trance. But even then, I wasn't panicked. I was just trying to understand what I was looking at. It felt like I was being drawn toward it. I slowly pulled the covers down and started getting out of bed, never taking my eyes off this thing. That alone was so unlike me. I would never have done that on my own. But I remember moving carefully, almost peacefully, like I was supposed to follow. Then the figure turned away from me and started walking up the stairs. The next thing I remember, I was already on the landing behind it. It was a few steps ahead of me, maybe 3 or so, and as it climbed, I climbed too, getting a little closer each time. Then it stopped. I stopped too. At that point, I was close enough to really notice it. I started reaching my hand out toward it, almost like I wanted to touch it. And while all of this was happening, I was thinking so clearly. That's another part I've never forgotten. I was fully aware, studying it in this weird state of amazement. It looked human-shaped, but not fully human. Its body was covered in thick fur, kind of like a wolf's, but the color was unusual, a reddish-brown shade, almost like clay or rust. It seemed solid, muscular even, but not huge, not towering, maybe around the size of a grown man. What stood out most were the arms. They seemed longer than normal, not quite proportioned like ours. I kept reaching toward it, wanting to feel the fur, I think. Its back was still to me. Then, just before I could touch it, it started to turn around. And because we were more than halfway up the stairs by then, the light was brighter. I realized I was finally about to see its face. It turned slowly, and right at that exact moment, I heard my mother's voice call out, "Casey, what are you doing?" The second I heard her, I turned toward her voice. That broke whatever hold the moment had on me. I looked right back at the figure, and it was gone. Just gone. And suddenly I was aware of myself again, really aware, and I was standing there on the stairs with both arms stretched out in front of me, reaching for absolutely nothing. My mother rushed over, clearly startled, and put me back to bed. I remember her tucking me in so tightly, wrapping the blankets around me like she was trying to shield me from something she didn't understand. Then the next morning, I woke up to her panicking. I still don't know what happened that night. Maybe it was some kind of lucid dream, maybe sleepwalking, maybe something paranormal. I honestly can't say. But I've carried it with me my whole life, always wondering what that thing was and why I felt no fear at all. More than anything, I remember how aware I was, how deeply conscious I felt in the middle of it, like I somehow knew this was not an ordinary dream. This happened years ago, when I was about 12, maybe 13. I was out with a friend of mine, Mara, and she randomly decided it would be a good idea to go ghost hunting in a graveyard in the middle of the afternoon on a Sunday. I remember thinking it was such a pointless idea, but I went along with it anyway. The only reason I didn't totally hate it was because at least it was daytime. The graveyard was right next to a thick stretch of woods, and I know for a fact I would never have gone anywhere near it after dark. We walked around for a while before we got there, and the first thing that felt strange was how empty it was. Usually on Sundays, there are at least a few people around, visiting graves, cleaning them, leaving flowers, something. But that day, it was quiet. Too quiet. At the time, we brushed it off. We weren't thinking seriously about anything paranormal yet. As we wandered deeper in, we came across a freshly dug burial plot, just sitting there, open and waiting. That really unsettled me. It felt sad, and honestly kind of wrong to be standing there staring at it. After that, we started reading the headstones, looking at the names and dates, and being stupid kids, we started making fun of some of the names. I was the one who started it, and Mara joined in. I still feel bad about that. Then, out of nowhere, I heard my name. Clear as day. Not close by, not whispered, not imagined. Someone called my name from somewhere deeper in the graveyard. We both stopped immediately. No laughing, no talking, nothing. We just stood there, listening, trying to figure out where it had come from. Then we started backing away. And just as we did, it happened again. This time it didn't sound far away. It sounded like it was coming from all around us at once. The voice had this weird, crackling quality to it, almost like radio static. I can still remember how unnatural it sounded. That was the moment we panicked. We ran. We were just two young girls alone in a cemetery beside the woods, and suddenly every bad idea about being there hit us at once. We ran all the way back toward town, and it felt like forever before we got out of that area. But even after we were back near the streets and houses, I heard my name again. This time, it sounded exactly like my aunt's voice. That's what scared me most, because my aunt wasn't even in the country anymore. She had moved to England months before. Still, I called her later just to check, half hoping there was some normal explanation. She answered, and no, she wasn't back. She hadn't been anywhere near us. So we tried to let it go. I walked Mara home that evening like I normally did. She lived in a house maybe 15 minutes from my apartment. We said goodbye, and I headed home. Everything seemed fine until I got inside and looked at my phone. I had a bunch of missed calls from her, one after another, and a flood of messages asking why I was doing that to her and telling me to stop. I had no idea what she was talking about. I texted back, confused, and then she called me. She was hysterical, crying, yelling, furious. She kept saying I wasn't funny, that I needed to leave her alone, that she never wanted to speak to me again. I got upset too and started yelling back, asking her what on earth she meant, and she showed me someone standing outside her front door. It looked exactly like me. Same clothes, same hair, same height, same face. Even the voice matched mine. It was pounding on her door and calling for her like I wanted to be let in. I remember just staring at the screen, completely numb. I was at home. I had just walked back. There was no way I could be there. When Mara realized from the call that I truly was in my apartment, we both just froze. Then she hung up and went to get her parents. After that day, things never really felt normal again. I started noticing shadows where there shouldn't be any. Sometimes when I'm walking home alone, I catch sight of figures that look almost human, but not quite. Pale, almost glowing white, a little transparent, gone the second I focus on them. And sometimes, late at night, I hear knocking at my window. I live on the 4th floor. There are no trees tall enough to reach it, no balcony, no reason for anything to be tapping on that glass. I still don't know what happened that day. I don't know if we disturbed something, invited something in, or if something just decided to follow me home. But whatever it was, it knew my name. I want to tell you this carefully, because even now, years later, I still don't fully know what happened to me. For context, I was a heavy IV meth and heroin user from my teens until I was about 31. I'm sober now, coming up on 7 years, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. I also can't ignore the fact that a lot of the strangest, darkest experiences of my life happened during those years. So maybe the drugs explain everything. Maybe they don't. I honestly still go back and forth. It started around Christmas of 2015, when my sister gave me this old Ouija board from the 1950s. It looked worn, yellowed with age, the kind of thing that already feels wrong before you even touch it. I used it in my house a few times, mostly out of curiosity, and not long after that, things in the house started to feel off. I'd get this constant sense that I was being watched. Little things would disappear and turn up in weird places. Sometimes I'd hear movement and swear someone else was there when I was completely alone. And more than anything, there was this heavy feeling in the house, like something dark had settled in and was just quietly waiting. That summer, I got really sick. I developed MRSA and sepsis and ended up in the ICU for about a month. Logically, I know exactly why that happened. My drug use put me there. But even in the middle of all that, I couldn't shake the feeling that something evil had been following me, like it had attached itself to my life and was just feeding off the chaos. After I got out of the hospital, I managed to stay clean for about a year and a half. During that time, one of my sisters and I rented a house together. For a while, things felt stable. Then one afternoon, she, another sister, and I decided to use the Ouija board again in the backyard. We were trying to reach our mom, who had passed away. That part still hurts to say because I think we really wanted comfort. We wanted it to be her. But the board told us it wasn't our mother. It gave us a different name. Not viscous like before, but something close, viscusa. I still remember how cold I felt reading it. The whole time we were sitting there was a crow perched in this dead tree near the fence, just watching us. It never moved. It was so still it almost didn't seem real. The next morning, around 4 o'clock, I woke up to this violent crashing sound. I jumped out of bed thinking someone had broken in, but when I looked outside, that dead tree had fallen straight through the fence. It landed so close to my bedroom window that if the angle had been slightly different, it could have come right through the wall. After that, the house felt unbearable. My sister and I both started having brutal sleep paralysis. We'd talk about waking up unable to move, sensing something in the room, feeling watched. One morning, I opened my eyes and saw what I thought was my sister on the floor of my bedroom, crawling slowly across the carpet. I remember just freezing, staring, trying to make sense of it. Then I got up to check, and there was nobody there. My sister was still asleep in her room. By early 2018, I had relapsed hard. Everything started falling apart after that. My sister and I stopped living together, and that summer, one of my closest friends came over to my apartment, and we used the board again. The board spelled out, "No H." We took it to mean no heroin. Even then, even as messed up as my life was, that message shook me. The next night, I was at my friend's house with her and another girl. I felt horrible, like my whole body was shutting down, like I was dying. But addiction doesn't care how bad you feel. I still mixed up a huge shot of heroin and meth. And the second I used, something went very, very wrong. My friends told me later that I started speaking in a deep voice that did not sound like mine at all. Not just deeper, different. They said it sounded guttural, harsh, almost inhuman. I would switch back and forth between that voice and my regular one, and when I was using my normal voice, I was begging them to help me. But then it would change again into this language nobody understood. It didn't sound like English. It didn't sound like anything familiar. They said I screamed for hours. Not yelled, screamed. In that voice. Eventually they got so scared, they locked themselves in another room and left me where I was until I finally passed out. The next morning, everything felt wrong. They were distant with me, almost like they were afraid of me, or like I had done something unforgivable. Later that day, I decided to go back to my apartment, and on the way, I got pulled over and arrested for drug possession. Looking back, that whole stretch of my life feels like free fall. By the end of 2018, I ended up in a Christian-based rehab. At first, I hated it. I mean, really hated it. I was angry, resistant, bitter, all of it. But over time, something in me softened. I started opening myself up, at least a little, to the idea of God, and to the possibility that maybe I needed spiritual healing just as much as physical sobriety. Then one night, while I was lying in bed fully awake, I felt a very clear tap on my leg. I turned over, and what I saw is still one of the most terrifying things I've ever experienced. Standing there was this tall, female-shaped figure with a long, stretched face and these sharp, horrible teeth. It didn't look human. It looked wrong in every possible way. The closest comparison I've ever found is that scene in The Devil's Advocate. That's honestly the nearest thing I can think of. I screamed so loudly I woke up the whole house. I jumped out of bed, ran out of the room sobbing, and I was shaking so badly I could barely stand. The people there had to sit with me for hours before I could calm down. And when I finally went back to bed, I held a cross in my hand the entire night. What stays with me is this. After that night, I never had another experience like that again. Since then, I felt free in a way I never used to. I did spend some time exploring Christianity more deeply, and while my beliefs have evolved, I still believe in God. I also believe there are spiritual things we don't fully understand. And I've stayed sober all these years, which is the biggest blessing of my life. So when I look back on everything, I still wonder what it really was. Were those experiences drug-induced hallucinations? Was it trauma and subconscious fear taking shape in my mind? Or did I really come into contact with something dark, something evil, something that attached itself to me when I kept opening doors I shouldn't have opened? That's my story. I still carry the questions, but I'm just grateful I made it out alive. So this happened in 2023, and honestly, it's one of those things I still can't fully explain. For a bit of background, my grandfather on my dad's side passed away about 20 years earlier when I was really little. My grandparents had lived in a ground floor flat, and my uncle, their youngest son, lived in the flat upstairs. My granddad died in the main bedroom there. By 2023, my Nana had moved into a nursing home because of dementia, and my uncle was still living upstairs. One day, my dad took me over to the flat to collect some of my Nana's jewelry, since she'd always said she wanted me to have it, and he thought it made sense to take it now rather than leave it sitting there. He also said I could look through the spare room and take any old toys or keepsakes I still wanted. Then he and my uncle headed off to visit my Nana, which meant I was left alone in both flats. When you came in through the front door, there was this little hallway. The main bedroom was immediately on the left, and the spare bedroom was across from it on the right. Farther down were the living room and kitchen. I went straight into the spare room first, because I was hoping to find this old vintage toy I used to love, an old transforming burger toy from the late 80s. I started rummaging through boxes and shelves, but I got distracted by all my childhood things. Sitting on my Nana's bookshelf was this music box I remembered so clearly, 2 tiny kittens in a little cart. I picked it up and wound it, just for old time's sake. The second it started playing, I regretted it. The tune had always sounded a little sad to me, and being there alone, surrounded by all those memories, it suddenly hit me so hard. I started feeling like I was doing something wrong, like I was taking things from my Nana when she wasn't there, even though everyone had told me it was okay. She was still alive, but she didn't remember me anymore, and I think that's what made it hurt so much. I just stood there thinking about how badly I wanted things to go back to how they used to be, and I completely broke down. I was crying so hard I could barely see. I tried to keep searching for a little while, but I couldn't focus. After the music box finished, I picked it up and put it carefully back on the shelf. I remember that clearly, because I moved it enough that if there had been any little bit of winding left in it, it would have run out then. I'm sure of that. I looked around a bit more, but in the end, I gave up. I never did find the toy. After that, I went across the hall into the main bedroom. There was a huge mirrored wardrobe along one wall, and I stood in front of it for a moment, trying to pull myself together. It wasn't working. I was still crying as I went around the bed toward my Nana's dresser to collect the jewelry. Then, all at once, I stopped. I heard the music box playing again, and I mean, really playing. Not a tiny leftover note or some mechanical click, the full melody. By then, a good amount of time had passed since it had stopped in the other room, and I knew there was no winding left in it. I turned my head and just listened. I stopped crying completely. Then I slowly walked back around the bed and toward the bedroom door, almost expecting the sound to stop or for me to realize I was imagining it. But when I reached the doorway and looked straight into the spare room, I could see the music box sitting there on the shelf, and it was absolutely playing. I just froze. Then I said, out loud, "Granddad, is that you?" The music stopped instantly. Not faded out, not slowed down, it just stopped. I rang my boyfriend first, then my mom, and told them what had happened. Both of them agreed it was really strange. When my dad and uncle came back, I told them too. My dad has never believed in ghosts or anything like that, but even he admitted it was odd. And my uncle said that if anyone in the family would hang around to keep an eye on us, it would probably be my granddad. What makes it even more meaningful to me is that my mom once had an experience too. After my granddad died, she believes she saw him one night before I became seriously ill with pneumonia. She said he told her things were going to get rough, but that I'd be all right. So between what happened to her and what happened to me, I really do believe my granddad is still looking out for me in his own way. And honestly, that brings me a lot of comfort. I live in Minnesota, and over the past couple of years, I've had two experiences that I still can't fully explain. I've replayed them so many times in my head, and even now, they don't feel any less unsettling. The first one happened in late 2024 in a small town near Malacca, at an assisted living home where I was working at the time. One of my coworkers had stepped outside, and this was someone who was usually tough, calm, not the kind of person who got shaken easily. I was in the bathroom when she suddenly came rushing back inside. I could hear her yelling before I even got out, but I couldn't make out what she was saying at first. I just knew from the sound of her voice that something had scared her badly. When I came out, she was panicked, stumbling over her words, repeating herself, saying she'd seen someone by her truck. She kept motioning over her face again and again, trying to explain that the person had on dark clothing, a hood up, and where the face should have been. There was just nothing. No features, no eyes, no mouth, nothing at all. Just this black, empty space. Before I could even process it, she ran to the nearest window and yelled for me to come look. And when I got there, I saw it too. There was a person standing outside, near the lot, wearing a bright pink jacket. At first, they were just staring down at the ground. Then, after a few seconds, they slowly lifted their head toward us. The moment they did, they bolted across the street faster than I would have thought possible and stopped near another building. My coworker ran outside after it, and I followed to the doorway, yelling for her to come back, because I wanted absolutely no part of getting closer to whatever that was. But she kept going, and then quietly told me to come there and look. What I saw next is burned into my memory. The figure in the pink jacket was bent forward in this unnatural way, arms hanging almost to the ground, completely still. And I mean completely still. Not one twitch, not one shift of weight, nothing. Which made no sense, because seconds earlier it had sprinted across the street. But now it looked frozen, like someone had pressed pause on it. Its head was angled toward the ground, and the whole thing felt wrong in a way I can't really put into words. I didn't stay out there. I turned around and went straight back inside. That was enough for me. The second sighting happened on March 1st, 2025, near a cemetery around the Mille Lacs area while I was driving up toward Brainerd for work. This one was shorter, but it hit me just as hard. I was passing by the casino, and for some reason I happened to glance to my left. I never do that there, and honestly, I hadn't even really noticed there was a cemetery across from it before. But that day I looked, and standing at the entrance was a man pacing back and forth. He had on a gray and black hoodie, dark gloves, black pants, dark shoes, hood up. And just like the first one, his face was wrong. Completely blank. No features at all. Just this dark, faceless void where a face should have been. I remember him turning and looking directly at me as I drove by, then just continuing to pace like nothing had happened. I did not turn around. I didn't look back either. I've tried to brush both experiences off, tried to tell myself there had to be some explanation, but I still haven't come up with one that feels right. And honestly, I just want to know whether anyone else around this part of Minnesota has seen anything like that, or anything even remotely similar. Because once you see something like that, it stays with you. So this happened years ago on Halloween night. I know that already makes it sound like the setup to some cliché ghost story, but I swear, that's really when it happened. I was probably around 11, maybe 12. I can't remember my exact age anymore. I was staying in my cousin's neighborhood, hanging around outside with my aunt and a couple of her neighbors while riding my cousin's bike up and down the street. It was getting really late, probably close to midnight. Most of the trick-or-treaters had gone home by then, and my cousin was inside watching scary movies. At some point, I decided to ride farther down the middle of the street, just to get a little space from the adults. My aunt was getting on my nerves for whatever reason, though I honestly can't remember what she was even doing. Since it was so late and the neighborhood was quiet, I wasn't worried about cars. I got maybe 15 or 20 yards away when suddenly, this bright light appeared right in front of me and completely washed out my vision. My first thought was that it had to be a car with its high beams on, so I started turning the bike to head for the curb. But then, the light faded almost as quickly as it had shown up, and when I looked back down the road, there was no car. Instead, I saw this enormous figure standing there. It was maybe 20 yards away from me, and the first thing I noticed was how unbelievably tall it looked. In my memory, it seemed as tall as a utility pole, or at least close to the height of the trees around it. I couldn't make out a face or any real details from that distance, but I remember how thin and unnaturally long it looked. Its skin seemed pale, almost washed out, and there was something strange about it, like it wasn't fully solid. Not invisible exactly, just faint, almost translucent. The closest comparison I can give is that it looked like a bare, stretched-out version of Slender Man. I know that sounds ridiculous, and honestly kind of generic, but that's still the best way I can describe what I saw. The weirdest part is that I wasn't terrified right away. I was mostly just confused. I remember staring at it, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Then, after a few seconds, it started moving toward me. It walked slowly, but the way it moved was wrong somehow, stiff and awkward, like its body didn't bend the way it should. Then it made this sudden sharp turn off the road, stepped onto the sidewalk, and disappeared down a narrow walking path that led toward a small creek behind the houses. That path was dark, and within a second or two I lost sight of it completely. That's when I finally felt unsettled. I turned around and rode straight back to my aunt's place. The adults were still outside talking like nothing had happened. I asked if any of them had seen something down the road, and somehow none of them had noticed anything at all. I didn't think they'd believe me, so I changed my story and said I'd just seen a raccoon or something. Then I went inside. The rest of the night was totally normal. Nothing else strange happened. But even now, all these years later, that's still the one experience I've had that I can't explain away. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. Maybe it was something ordinary that looked wrong in the dark. But honestly, it never felt ordinary. And I still think about it sometimes. I've always been fascinated by sound and the way it can affect both the mind and the body. But for a long time, it was just a curiosity of mine. I didn't know it would one day become something much deeper, something personal. What really changed everything was an experience I had years ago, one that still stays with me. It made me see reality in a completely different way and pushed me toward creating and working with solfeggio frequencies. It happened at my grandmother's house in the Puebla region of Mexico, a place that always felt full of memory, mystery, and presence. My grandmother, who spoke Nahuatl, was known in the family for her prayers, herbal remedies, and quiet spiritual wisdom. One evening, I was alone in her room, a room that still carried her energy so strongly, and I began to hear this low humming sound. It wasn't coming from a speaker or an appliance. It felt like it was coming from the air itself. The sound was steady, deep, almost vibrating through me. Within moments, I felt this intense pressure in my chest, and my body froze. I couldn't move. Everything around me seemed to disappear into that sound until it was the only thing I could hear. Then, as it grew stronger, I saw figures, tall, shadow-like forms moving slowly around the room. They didn't feel aggressive, but they were unmistakably there. I remember being terrified, but at the same time, I felt like I was witnessing something beyond ordinary explanation. In that moment, I thought of my grandmother, Elena, and the things she used to say about protecting your energy. She believed that certain sounds, prayers, and vibrations could shift what we allow into our space. She would always say that sound had power, not just to heal, but also to influence what we cannot see. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I started researching sound, vibration, and spiritual traditions, and that's when I discovered solfeggio frequencies, these ancient tones associated with sacred music, healing practices, and inner transformation. I became obsessed with learning more. I started experimenting with tone generators, synths, and different sound layers, trying to recreate frequencies that felt meaningful to me. What surprised me most was what I felt when I began listening to them regularly. I started having experiences that reminded me of that night in my grandmother's room. But this time, instead of fear, I felt calm. Deep calm. Peace, clarity, and this strange but beautiful sense of connection, like I was touching something just beyond the surface of everyday life. That's what led me to bring these frequencies into my meditation and healing work. I started to understand sound as more than just something we hear. To me, it became a doorway, a way of entering altered states of awareness and connecting with something greater than ourselves. And honestly, I still wonder about it all. Are sound vibrations part of a bigger mystery we still don't fully understand? Maybe. Science hasn't explained everything, but ancient cultures seem to know that sound could shift perception, energy, and even reality itself. The more I explore it, the more convinced I become that sound is one of the most powerful tools we have. Today, these frequencies are part of both my life and my creative path. Whether I'm using them for meditation, healing, or spiritual protection, I truly believe their potential is limitless.